Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett, Agent 1123 of your Cosmic Intelligence Agency. And I'm very excited today to have a conversation with a fellow astrologer who lives in Cape Town, South Africa. And Theo, please come on in. This is Theodore Naicker, friends. And we're going to speak today about some of the similarities and differences between three zodiac philosophies, one constellational, one sidereal, and one tropical. How in the heavens are you, Theo?
I'm good, thank you. It's evening here, and it is winter here, so we are braving the storms for tonight.
Yeah, you're evening, winter time, and I'm like midday in the springtime. I mean, I guess more spring and autumn, right? But
right.
I wish you luck for tonight's storm. It's pretty gray out here, but I did see some sun today. But this is a beautiful thing because this Cosmic Intelligence Agency where we are meeting is a global happening, and it's really wonderful to speak with a friend who's in a sense, on the other side of the globe and the other side of the seasonal happenings and all of that, because part of what we're getting after today and speaking about these different zodiacs will have us entertain the idea of the globe and, what is global and whatnot.
Exactly.
I think one of the great problems for tropical astrology, which many teach to be a seasonal thing, is that there's seasonal opposition between these northern and southern hemispheres of Earth, right? So I hear a lot of astrologers actually teach things like the sun rules Leo because that's the hottest time of year, but that's only true for half the globe, right? And so tropical astrology right there might have an issue. So I want to help unfold a little bit of what I feel to be the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, but also to speak about these three different philosophies. I'm going to bring an image up on screen here. Just show this picture of three different zodiacs. And on the very outside, you'll see these words that are familiar, folks, like Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. On the very inside, in the blue, around the Earth, you'll see these glyphs that you know. And you might notice as well that those glyphs are not aligned to the names that we associate with them, right? So on the very inside in the blue, that is the tropical zodiac, which is aligned to the cardinal directions of Earth, and I'll show that in a bit. In the middle, we see the constellational zodiac. The constellations are of different sizes, but the tropical zodiac divides the circle of 360 degrees into 12 equal slices of 30, unlike the constellations. And on the very outside, another equal sign zodiac that's not based on the Earth directions, but is based rather on a division of the ecliptic by starting with a star into 30 equal degrees, and that's called the sidereal zodiac. And Theo, my understanding of your practice is your Spica Astrology, right? Is your website?
That's right, yes.
And this is a star where many of the sidereal zodiacs set the mark to begin their signs.
Correct. That's the traditional reference point, the star Spica, which is called Chitra in the Vedic.
Star Spica is called Chitra?
Tradition.
And what does Chitra mean?
Yes. Chitra means a mark, sort of an accessory piece. So you can think about it as, the energy behind the Chitra nakshatra, which is represented by the star Chitra, that portion of space, is sort of the architect of the universe as a deity. So it's a skillful artisan way of etching onto the sky something which is the structure of the karma which we're looking at. So it's got that sort of vibe about it. And so that's why it's used as a reference. That's one of the reasons why.
All right, I'm going to show a few charts that I put together. Just get the right screen share up here. So this is titled Gemini Theo CIA Tropical, and this was our start time, where I am in Berkeley, California, 11 a.m. Pacific today, Monday, the day of the moon. May 20th, 2019. Leo on the rise. I have this cast for the tropical zodiac and porphyry house systems. Sun in the last degree of Taurus. All right. So here is the same time, same zodiac, but cast now for Cape Town, South Africa, where Theo is.
Yeah.
And
Very nice.
Capricorn on the rise, right? Because on the other side of the earth from me. Somewhere, not necessarily in between, but where the Cosmic Intelligence Agency is headquartered is Melbourne, Australia. So here's the same time, tropical zodiac in Melbourne, 4 a.m. when we began, and Aries on the rise. But you'll notice that all the planets are in the same degrees, of the same signs. The sun, 29.5 degrees Taurus. Moon can join Jupiter almost exactly in 22, 23 Sagittarius, okay? And so the signs are really global, right? It's the houses that are, I like to say the signs are of the whole. They're really measured from the center of the earth, the place where we are all connected. So Theo, if you would, reach your hands up above your head, please. And you're reaching to very different stars in South Africa than I am right now.
Correct.
In California.
Correct. That's right.
You are, wherever you are listening, reach your hands up. But if we come down through our spines, we will all meet in the center of the earth, in the place where we are all connected. That is the below, the whole. And that's where we really measure astrology from. And that's where the signs, from, in my point of view, and I'll get back to this, emanate from. But the houses are about the surface, the particular. So it's a different season in Cape Town and Melbourne than it is here in California. The surface of Earth, very particular. And of course, this describes the houses. But what we're getting after here, and I want to just do a little thing. How do I do this? Here is a totally different image. Sorry, I just want to swap a couple more charts around. All right. I think this will get us back. Okay, right. So here is this moment we began today as cast for the headquarters of the Cosmic Intelligence Agency, the real CIA, Melbourne, Australia, 4 a.m., May 21st, 2019, with the tropical zodiac, which shows Moon and Jupiter in Sagittarius, Aries on the rise, and the sun in the last degree of Taurus with Mercury nearby. And now I'll show the same time, 4 a.m., May 21st, 2019, Melbourne, Australia, but now showing, this is a Lahiri sidereal zodiac, and we'll ask Theo about the differences of different sidereal zodiacs in a bit, but currently it's about 24 degrees different than the tropical zodiac. And so where we saw Aries on the rise for the tropical zodiac, for the same moment, the sidereal zodiac puts Pisces rising, that Moon Jupiter conjunction in the sign of Scorpio, and Mercury near the sun remain in Taurus, but rather than being at the very end of Taurus, they're early on. And I think this is one of the most confusing things that astrologers get into. And I'm just gonna like maybe salt that wound a little by also showing one other view of right now. And this is cast for Berkeley, California. But I'm going to move, actually, let me move to Melbourne since we were just looking there. And I'll go down to Melbourne, Australia. This, by the way, we were just looking at charts in Astro Gold astrology software. And this is Stellarium astronomy software. And what I'll point your attention to here is, I think what I'll look at is the Moon Jupiter conjunction that's happening right now. So I'll rewind to, I'm in Melbourne, and let me go to 4 a.m. on the 21st, which is the chart we were looking at. And we'll see that Moon Jupiter conjunction. And in the sidereal zodiac, we're showing it very late, Sagittarius. I'll bring in this constellational art, so it's a little bit easier to see that this is the Sagittarius constellation, which I prefer to call the Archer. And you can see the Scorpion there. I think maybe a better example, when we go back to the charts, we'll find in the tropical zodiac that Saturn is in the sign of Capricorn. But in the sidereal zodiac, and sidereal means of the stars, Saturn is in the sign of Sagittarius. And indeed, we see that Saturn is with the constellation that I call the Archer, but the constellation of Sagittarius at this time. So this is a very confusing thing for tropical astrologers. Once we start engaging not only with these pieces of paper or computer screens, but get out into the sky and say, wait a second, I thought Saturn was in Capricorn. Why is Saturn up there in the Sagittarius constellation? It's very confusing. And there are many astrologers who are practicing Sidereal astrology of the stars astrology who couldn't agree more. Like, why the heck would you call that Capricorn when it's clearly Sagittarius? So what do you think about that, Theo?
Well, I think the first thing that people who are practicing, or even people that are astrology enthusiasts, needs to understand is that context is extremely important whenever we're looking at something. You know, even putting up a chart to begin with, what chart is it? Is it a horary chart? Is it a birth chart? Is it a mundane ingress chart? Because they interpret it quite differently, you know, and the rules, the significations can change quite a lot. So even from that point of view, what chart we're looking at. Now, what zodiac we're looking at, that's also requiring a discussion of context first. And within that context, it functions, or it seems to function. The mechanics of why, that's a whole other thing, you know, which I don't think we have the stamp of approval answer to, really, unless we go the divinatory route to explain things. But context, I think, is what makes it work. So the system that uses the tropical zodiac has its own contextual reference, which is the seasonal paradigm. And, you know, actually, I to add salt to your salt on that about the seasonal and hemispheric debate, which for me is a non-debate, because I actually do change the signs in the southern hemisphere, and it does work phenomenally better in the charts I look at.
Yeah, well, so, I've seen. So, I haven't done that much. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to like clarify that for people who are listening, that some astrologers, when they utilize the tropical zodiac, which I'll show tuned to the directions, but most of us teach it as a seasonal function. And what Theo is saying is that, well, in the southern hemisphere where it's autumn, not spring right now, then why would we say seasonally this is the energy of Taurus when Scorpio is the middle of the autumn sign, right? As we're just moving towards northern hemisphere, or tropical Gemini, why not call that Sagittarius down south? And what Theo is saying is that he does that practice, and some southern hemisphere astrologers especially do. And what you're saying is you found really good results that way, yeah?
Yeah, so I've looked at verified chart data for people born in Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Argentina. Not Brazil, I mean Argentina, some parts of Brazil, Peru, Chile, and South Africa. And also in the clients I've had the last 2.5 months, and workshops I've given. And people really resonate with the shift. And I know it's perhaps something new, because what I was brought up to learn about the tropical zodiac was that it doesn't shift in the southern hemisphere. But my research over the last couple of, the last period has shown that actually there's something more going on. So, and even found examples of people shifting from northern to southern, like some people are born in Ireland and they move to Australia, and some people are born in France and they cannot have any job, they are kicked out of school, they are kicked out of things, and they suddenly come to the southern hemisphere and they're now a formal mercenary working for top governments all over the place. So I find that shift, people are guided to go to, if I want to put it this way, the hemisphere that works better for them. And I found that happen in my own life when I lived in the northern hemisphere versus in the southern, in terms of my career and what happened to things in my family. So it's the more I look at it with more discernment and testing, the more I'm seeing the tropical as a sort of environmental negotiation that is happening.
I see. Let me just stop, because there's a lot of people listening right now who are southern hemispheres who use the tropical zodiac without reversing signs. So I just want to say I respect that. I respect your research. I respect your awareness, and also just tell people that are listening, like, check it out. But I have found, and I think, given that many great astrologers like Bernadette Brady or Yulia Siemens began the Cosmic Intelligence Agency, or they're very satisfied with the tropical signs that even though it's in the middle of the southern hemisphere autumn right now, they'll say it's shifting from Taurus to Gemini and find that works just fine. So, an interesting thing, and one of the things that's really tricky when we have these conversations is the truth is there are many ways to pet the cosmic cat, as I like to say. And as long as you're following, we're doing okay. So, before we proceed,
ways and systems and zodiacs and references and
a million house systems, at least 3 zodiacs, and really, hundreds of them if you get particular. But I'll show something in just a bit of why I find some astronomical evidence that will suggest the tropical zodiac does not have to be reversed. And I've actually seen it kind of work both ways. I mean, I know some folks who are like one woman in particular I'm thinking of who is so incredibly Tauresian. Everything she says is yummy and juicy, and she's this like embodiment practitioner. And she was born in the southern hemisphere, and the chart has no Taurus and tons of Scorpio. And so what I'm feeling in her as a kind of tropical aware astrologer is a lot of spring energy. And that would, support this idea that you're saying, is that the tropical zodiac really should be kind of a seasonal, locational, energetic consideration. So I'll just bookmark that. But Theo, I'd love to hear a bit about where you got your start, and say, before I do, that folks for whom this conversation is new, the tropical zodiac is that which most Western astrologers use. That is a function of, we say the Earth seasons, but I'll show something that I think takes it to a deeper root. And the sidereal zodiac is mostly employed in our day by what we know as Eastern astrologers or Vedic astrologers in India, Jyotish astrologers who are working with that tradition around the world. Now, there is certainly a rich Western sidereal zodiac tradition, but we can say, generally speaking, for the most part, Western astrology in our day and age is like a tropical zodiac system, and Eastern astrology generally is a sidereal zodiac system. So, Theo, which one did you begin with?
I began with the Western tropical tradition, and I began with medieval astrology. So the Robert Zoller School practice, which was, no modern planets, no asteroids, nothing except for the traditional, hard line, list of things to consider. But then I had a very good teacher in Rod Susskind in South Africa, and, he updated me. He's been practicing for over 30 years. So he updated my understanding to, also include, modern considerations. And I did eventually begin, as everyone does, I read the Linda Goodman's book back when I was in grade 4 and started giving quote unquote readings to people from it all around me back then even. So it coincided with my second Jupiter return. That the first Jupiter return was finding that book and starting giving those readings. And the second Jupiter return was psychological astrology, and then getting into medieval very quickly within less than a year. So that's where everything sort of began. It's really the Jupiter cycles that have pushed it for me.
And when did you switch or add Vedic astrology?
So Vedic astrology has always been there in the background because I'm born in the Hindu culture here in South Africa. My grandfather being a priest in our community, we had a temple in the backyard, and so I was very exposed to, the Navagraha as quote unquote deities in the temples, and part of the tradition of reading the book for people to choose names and things. It's very ingrained in the culture that we receive from India. So it's always been there, and it became formal in 2016 when I met my teacher, Pandit Sanjay Rath, and who's been practicing astrology in a family tradition since the early Middle Ages in India. So, and that's documented. So that for me, having Saturn in my ninth house, of course, is going to be traditional. And the more ancient it is, the better it ticks, it appeals to me. So that's how it started. And it's been quite intense. And I love that. And it's been also, in a way, connecting me back to my roots. So, yeah, it's been come full circle. But I'm very glad that I did start with the Western astrology first, because you sort of it's a much simpler system, and not that it's any less equivalent in terms of results, but it's just easier to cut your teeth on.
What sign is Saturn in for you, Theo?
In the Vedic system, Saturn is in Sagittarius right now. It's in the last portion of Sagittarius. So
I mean in your chart.
Oh, in my chart.
Yeah.
Saturn is in what sign? In Vedic, it is in Scorpio, in the ninth house, with the moon. And in tropical, because I flip it, it's in Gemini.
Right, okay. So most tropical astrologers would see your Saturn in Sagittarius in the ninth house.
Yeah, see, that's Sagittarius.
And then Sidereal Scorpio in the ninth house. Because you, for the southern hemisphere, flip the seasonal energies, the seasonal signs. You see Saturn in tropical Gemini for you and Sidereal Scorpio. Right. So even like more confusing and awesome. So people hang with us.
It's the perfect webinar hookup, for this sort of thing to be discussed.
I think one thing that we can say, and it's beautiful that your, Vedic teacher is a priest in the community and goes way back in a family lineage to the Middle Ages. There's not really any Western astrologers that can say this. If so, they were underground, right? Because we know in the West, the church really was burning astrology at the stake, and that it had to go safe places to survive. Like so much of the medieval tradition was really like held in the Arabic realms while things were getting super crazy, we can say, in the West, and that, eventually astrology resurfaced in the Western context. And it's really just recently where we're finding our way back to many of the documents from the Hellenistic times that have been on the shelves but weren't translated because who would dare, And so it's interesting to see what happened with what we might call Western astrology in these times where it had to be taken away or hidden underground, where it's resurfaced and how, and later on where I think very recently, like courtesy in many respects to Project Hindsight, the three Roberts in the early 90s who started these translation systems, and we're bringing back a lot of the ancient context. Like, I mean, even in Western astrology, sect, as simple as day and night was lost for like 1,000 years. It's like a wild thing, right? And where the Vedic stream has continued for thousands of years. And so this isn't to say, because I think what happens with astrology far too often is this is right and this is wrong. And it just doesn't work for me, and I'm interested in knowing that both of these systems are right. Well, how can we work with them both to tune into mysteries like the dawning of the Age of Aquarius, right? So I'm preparing a talk for the IVC, the Vedic conference in February of 2020 in Kolkata. Will you be there?
Yes, I've got to finish my paper.
That's where I'm at too. And it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to wrap with you, for some help in tuning into a more authoritative point of view of what the sidereal philosophy is. But I'm presenting on some of the differences between tropical and sidereal and how I believe we need to work with both of them, because I think that the tropical zodiac is the zodiac of the earth and the sidereal is the zodiac of the heavens, and the way that they work and move, basically I see to be the mechanism for the evolution of the archetypes themselves, and that I can use this shifting to determine such mysterious things as when is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. I actually want to get into a bit of that today, but first I'll just say that I started also really in a Jupiter return, although actually by this point that's not true. Jupiter was crossing my ascendant. There was a total solar eclipse at my north node. I started very late.
Okay, well, that'll do it.
Yeah, right. 6 minutes away from my north node. and which is in Scorpio, tropical, but is in the sign of Libra in the sidereal zodiac. And I came in really late. It was my second nodal return, so around 37 years ago, about 6 years ago. 37 years old.
And you've actually done a lot of work with the nodes, haven't you?
I have. I mean, I think less than I'm focused on them less than like evolutionary astrology paradigm is, like Jeffrey Wolf Green or Forrest Schools. But I'm very interested in the nodes because so much of my astrology is like sun, moon, earth based. And those are the points in our sky where those three parts of the philosophy, the sun, the moon, the earth, agree, right? Where that line goes through. But I'm a very visual astrologer. And
yes,
I got my start at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and like right away really got into these truths that at least in that school what we're taught is that signs and constellations are very different things. So
they are very different things.
That's few minutes and just show some slides and an animation I created to show some folks like some astronomy of the tropical zodiac. I will say there's a 3-hour movie. No, it's not that long, but there's a long movie I recently put up on my YouTube channel, which is Gemini Brett, called The Very Real Astronomy of the Tropical Zodiac, which for me, it's important to teach because I think astrology so often gets into this idea that astrology is some symbolic language alone. And I'm very fond of saying that astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And so much of my path is trying to find the roots of these rules that we use or the proofs of the equations that we use out when I'm walking around the land and tuning into places like Stonehenge and this. So I just want to take about a 5, maybe 7-minute trip and get through a little bit of what the tropical zodiac is. Then we'll bring the sidereal in. I want to talk about the constellational zodiac and show, you know, the claims that the astronomers make that they feel proves that astrology is fake. And we'll address that for a second. And then we'll get into these philosophies, having seen what the tropical zodiac is and what the sidereal zodiac is, where they agree, maybe where they disagree, and then maybe we can use these both together to get after, at the end of this video in like 45 minutes time, when is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. So if you would, Theo, please mute your microphone just for a few minutes, and I'm going to show some slides, and I'll call you back on in a bit. And friends, if you're watching this live on Facebook or later on YouTube or wherever it may be, we would love for you to share this around, you know, chime in with some comments or some questions. We won't be able to answer them live, but I will get back to them at a later time and review them online and send some written answers or any of your contemplations or challenges, or gladly accepted, invited. Please keep the comments on topic, if you will. So here again, we're looking at 3 zodiacs. And right now I'm going to explore the middle one, which I'm showing here with the glyphs. You might see the Earth in the center, and it looks different, right? Because the North Pole is down. I mean, usually when we see a compass rose, you'll see north up and east to the right, yeah? But this is not how we cast astrology charts. We put the ascendant, the rise, which is the eastern horizon, on the left of the chart. And in a northern hemisphere chart, this means that the midheaven, right, the top of the chart, near the top of the chart, is going to be due south. Because in the northern hemisphere, at least north of the Tropic of Cancer, the sun culminates due south every day, sets in the west, and in the middle of the night, due north. And, you know, true to what Theo was saying before, I mean, if we're going to switch signs for the seasonal opposition between hemispheres, in a sense, the way that the chart is shown should be shifted too, because if you're looking at the midheaven in the southern hemisphere, it puts the ascendant at the east on your right. And that's a tale for another time. But anyway, the purple ring on the outside, sidereal zodiac. Theo is speaking about the star Spica, and it's here. We show it as the shaft of wheat that the priestess of the heavens, the Virgo constellation, holds. And interestingly, most sidereal zodiacs begin the sidereal sign of Libra at the star that most astronomers say to be in the constellation of Virgo, which is a very strange thing. And for the tropical astrology which is the blue on the inside here. Spica is about 24 degrees tropical Libra in our day and age, and this changes. So let me get after that, but I want to like bring it back to something that's a little bit more grounded and something you know. Okay, so first of all, what we're looking at here is the terminator. Half of Earth is always in the light and half is always in the dark. The terminator line between, which runs right through the north and south poles at either equinox time. And we tune into the daily motion, the primary motion, Earth spinning on its axis, and then the secondary motion, which is the annual motion, the yearly motion, and that's Earth orbiting the sun, right? Bringing us day and night, the primary motion, the daily motion, and winter, spring, summer, and fall, the secondary motion, the annual motion, the orbital motion. Okay, revolution and rotation. Revolution, the orbit, secondary motion, rotation, which we're looking at here, the primary motion, the daily motion, okay? So the axis of Earth's spin is the north-south pole, and the plane of Earth's spin, which I like to call the circle of matter, because though Earth's spin brings you such hits as sunrise and sunset, it's really all about a motion of Earth and Earth alone, right? So Earth spins on the axis and we see the heavens rising in the east and setting in the west because Earth spins west to east, so it's relativity. So the celestial equator, Earth's equator projected out into space, is this plane of Earth's spin, okay? This is the plane of Earth's orbit about the sun, and it is called the ecliptic plane, okay? So the ecliptic, like if you imagine just running around a lamp in the center of your room, the plane of your orbit of that lamp would be the ground, right? Earth about sun, the plane is the ecliptic, and if we extend that plane out towards infinity, we encounter the constellations of the zodiac. So from Earth's point of view, the sun is always held by one of those 12 star groups, okay? And also from Earth's point of view, we don't see Earth orbiting sun because we live here, right? What we see is the sun going about Earth. And the plane that sun in this apparent experience orbits the Earth through the constellations of the zodiac. That is called the ecliptic plane. I like to call it the circle of spirit because that's where the sun lives. So I'm considering Earth to be matter and sun to be spirit, planting some seeds for a tale to be told another time in that regard too. Very importantly, the plane of day, that's Earth's spin, celestial equator, and the plane of year, that's Earth's orbit, or from Earth's point of view, sun's orbit, the ecliptic, they are not parallel, all right? They are separated by about 23.5 degrees. Now they intersect at the equinox points. And where the ecliptic intersects the equator, moving towards northern declination, is the 0 Aries point of the tropical zodiac, okay, or the Aries equinox point. And let me rewind this and I'll set this up because it seems that chart just goes really quickly. I didn't even mean to show this, but I will say this quickly. You'll see a little bit of it, especially at the equator on the Earth. If you face east, you will see that stars that rise south of east head to the south, stars that rise north of east head to the north, and basically in all moments time, we get this fountain of youth. Let's see if I can rewind this thing. Pause. Okay. That the eastern sky literally describes the motion that we see in the Aries glyph and actually curls back around on itself and sets. I feel that at least this glyph is describing the eastern energy. And this is one of the great keys to the tropical zodiac, because when the sun is at 0 Aries tropical, okay, and this is spring equinox for the northern hemisphere and autumnal equinox for the southern hemisphere, it places the sun due east of the center of the Earth. All right, so that's kind of a weird sounding thing. And again, I unpack this at great length in this movie you can find at YouTube on my Gemini Brett page called The Very Real Astronomy of the Tropical Zodiac, that basically shows that the tropical zodiac, like so many shamanic systems around the globe, is a system based upon the cardinal directions of Earth. All right, so the point is that Earth's spin axis the axis of the day, right, is always leaning north and south. I'm not talking about magnetic north and south, but true north and south. That's in fact what defines the directions. And as the Earth orbits the sun, we'll use my fist for that, it's always still pointing north, okay? And that's actually the reason for the seasons. So like when the northern axis is leaning towards the sun, let's go to that time here. Let me set that up. We'll go from Aries equinox, so tropical 0 Aries, and the Earth will see the sun move through Aries, Taurus, and Gemini signs on the way to summer solstice for the northern hemisphere, right? How do I know this is showing us summer solstice for the northern hemisphere, June solstice? Because the northern axis of Earth is leaning towards the sun. The southern axis of Earth is leaning away from the sun. So winter solstice in the southern hemisphere at this time, that in the tropical zodiac we typically define as the cusp between the signs of Gemini and Cancer, right? And it's very easy to see the directional nature of the zodiac in that regard, I think. We move from June solstice to September equinox, and the Earth sees the sun shifting through the signs, tropical signs of Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. And we get to this place where now the sun is due west of the center of Earth. I can't say it's due west of the surface of Earth because it depends where you are. Like when it's sunset and the sun is west in California, that doesn't mean it's sunset in Australia or South Africa, right? But from the center of Earth, east and west would be basically defined by being perpendicular to Earth's north and south axis, you see? And when the sun ingresses 0 Libra, or I could say this, regardless of the sun, the tropical 0 Libra degree is in every moment forever at 0 degrees, in every moment 0 degrees tropical Libra is due west of the center of Earth. All right. And I think that's kind of a foreign concept. We speak about this tropical zodiac as a seasonal thing, but really the seasons result from Earth's cardinal directions, which again are defined by Earth's primary motion, Earth's spin. And these planes of Earth's spin, the circle of matter, the celestial equator, and of Earth's orbit, the ecliptic plane, the circle of spirit, those planes and their intersection defines the tropical zodiac. Okay, so the equinox points are where they cross. The 0 Aries point is where they cross and towards northern declination, we say, and the 0 Libra point where they cross, where the ecliptic is moving towards southern declination. So if you've studied that, you'll know what I'm talking about. And where these two planes most diverge, and that angle is about 23.5 degrees, because that is the tilt angle of Earth in respect of to Earth's orbit of the sun. Those are the solstice points, right? 0 degrees tropical Cancer and 0 degrees tropical Capricorn. I said Tropic of Capricorn by mistake, but not necessarily either, because when the sun ingresses tropical Capricorn, okay, and that is when? December solstice, northern hemisphere winter solstice, southern hemisphere summer solstice, sun moving into 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, then the sun is directly above the Tropic of Capricorn on Earth, right? When the sun is in 0 Aries or 0 Libra equinox time, the sun shines directly above the equator. And when the sun ingresses tropical Cancer, it shines directly above the Tropic of Cancer, okay? The tropics, Cancer and Capricorn on the Earth, receive their name from the same thing the tropical zodiac does, which is the Greek word tropikos, which means turn around. Okay, so somehow, and this is an interesting thing, we get from these very 4 real directional astronomical points based upon the plane of Earth's day and Earth's year, the celestial equator and the ecliptic. And we move from these points of the equinox points and the solstices points very clearly 4 stations, seasonal stations, to 12 signs. and why? And I think the historical wrap is just because there are 12 months a year based on either new moon to new moon or moon about the zodiac, which may be true, but really there are 12.369 new moon to new moon a year if we started a year with a new moon. And there's about 13.37 orbits of the moon about Earth if you use that model every year. So Theo can probably get back to this a little bit too when we bring him back on. I'll just say that this tropical zodiac, which is tuned to the directions, tuned to these equinox and solstice stations, it's been celebrated, whether it was done so in this regard astrologically or not, probably not in places like Chichen Itza where they have their own calendar systems and their own divinatory systems. But this pyramid of Kukulkan there at Chichen Itza in the Yucatan shows this shadow serpent on one of the ramps at sunrise, just after sunrise on both equinox days. And that will work forever unless there's some kind of crazy comet-based cataclysm or otherwise shift of the Earth. Regardless of precession of the equinoxes, which I'll get into as well. Here's a solstice alignment at Stonehenge, still kept. A solstice alignment at a much older complex, maybe. It says Karnak and Luxor Temple in Egypt, okay? And this is the truth of the tropical zodiac. It's a directional thing based on equinoxes and solstices. Now, how we get from 4 to 12 signs, why are there 12 signs? I need to stop my share and share the sound, and I'll just play this short video, and then we'll bring Theo back on to wrap a little bit. And I showed this video at the beginning here too, but I'd take me, well, I teach this to my students, but we actually start with geometry and move through musical harmony and dance with astronomy. The old sacred science is known as the quadrivium, to get after what in the heavens is the zodiac. And I think that without tripping on exactly why we can jump from 4 to 12, if you just experience it with your eyes and your ears and don't worry about what's what, hopefully this short video will say a little something about how, as I like to say, creation creates in 12s. Thank you to the beautiful Anna Zaharia, who helped co-create these illustrations so I could animate them to show that dance for you. This for me is the zodiac, whether tropical or sidereal. It's based on what I like to call, or what is called, the seed of life construction. You'll see it forms, and this is 6 circles around one, creates a 6-petaled flower inside the first circle and a 6-petaled flower outside of the first circle. They are phased by 30 degrees. In astrology, we call these the polarities, earth and water signs. I like to show inside, and air and fire signs outside. We could say the yin and yang. There are many different expressions of astrological polarity, which shows up as these 2 sets of hexagons. These days we call these grand sextiles, but the sextile aspect used to be called a hexagon. Just as the square aspect, we still call it squares, and the quadruplicity, which is available to 12 but not 10, would be the cardinal fixed and mutable signs as we call them today. Triplicity, fire, earth, air, and water signs as we call them today. 12 makes 3 times 4 and 4 times 3 available, just as it makes 2 times 6 or 6 times 2. So we have quadruplicity, triplicity, and polarity. These are key functions of the zodiac, and just like the system of the musical octave, which in the West we divide into 12 half steps, right? And that's not some arbitrary thing. That's a very mathematical thing, or the seed of life construction creates that, 12 out of 7 circles, or 6 around 1. Sorry, we're going out of control here. It's a very mathematical thing. Now, if I connect the dots of the silver petal tips there or of the gold petal tips there, I'm going to create the regular hexagon, okay? And this, to me, I feel is Saturn showing us Saturn's tropical zodiac. I believe that every planet has its own zodiac based completely upon its orbital essence and its spin essence, and the intersection of those two planes, which is very different on every planet. Some more similar to Earth's than others, like Mars would have a pretty similar zodiac from this point of view. But the thing about the tropical zodiac, and here's Earth's again, it really has nothing to do with any of the stars except one, and that is the star that we call Sun or Sol, right? So the plane that we are using to define the zodiac by, at least in tropical astrology and most zodiacs, is the ecliptic plane. That's the plane of the Earth and the Sun. And this is a very important thing that tropical astrology really has to deal with. This is, you can see the URL at the bottom of the page, spaceplace.nasa.gov/starfinder2/en, okay? Check out this page. It's a pretty challenging thing. This is NASA's space place. It's what they're teaching the kids about astrology, which you see, astrology is not science. Astrology is not astronomy. You'll hear them say that astrologers are like reading fantasy stories. Over on the right, some people believe or make believe that the current sign of the zodiac affects how things go in their everyday lives, depending on the sign of their birth. This idea is called astrology, and people who claim to use the signs of the zodiac to make predictions are called astrologers. Okay, well, they go on to say this, that Mimi's birthday is August 4th. When she says, I'm a Leo, she means that on her birthday, the imaginary line from Earth through the sun and out into space on the other side of the sun points to the constellation Leo. The trouble is it doesn't. Read this article and find out why. And before I show you why this is true, let me just show you that this is true in our time. I will go to August 4th. We're in the tropical zodiac, we say Leo. And I'll show you that the sun at that time is aligned to the constellation called the Crab. And sidereal astrologers will say, yeah, that's Cancer. Right? And so why would tropical astrology say that that's not Cancer, that's Leo? Because once again, the tropical zodiac is really not defined by these stars. It is defined by the axis of Earth. And the northern axis of Earth leans towards this point in all times, the 0 Cancer tropical point. And then if we define signs like here, they're shown in 15-degree measures. There's 0 Cancer, 15 Cancer, 30 Cancer, which is 0 Leo, right? Here we see August 4th at within Leo in the tropical zodiac, but clearly not with the constellation that we call Leo. So if we want to honor a constellational zodiac, that's a wonderful thing. But let me show one more argument from NASA, which applies here in 2 ways. Okay. When the Babylonians first invented the 12 signs of the zodiac, a birthday between about July 23rd and August 22nd meant being born under the constellation Leo. Now, 3,000 years later, the sky has shifted because Earth's axis, North Pole, doesn't point in quite the same direction. Now Mimi's August 4th birthday would mean she was born under the sign of Cancer, one constellation earlier. We just saw that in Stellarium, okay? We're going to get back to axial precession and why there is a shift of the tropical signs through the constellations or the sidereal signs through the seasons, all right? But let me just state this claim by NASA as well, because while the first applies to, the first argument, I should say, applies to tropical astrology, like we see this August 4th sun aligned to the Crab. Okay, let me go about 2,000 years ago, and we'll see that that August 4th sun is aligned to the Lion. And so what NASA's saying is, hey, that is when Leo was Leo. That's when August was Leo. The sidereal signs are not changing with precession as far as how they're aligned to the constellations. It's much more of a constellational map. So sidereal astrologers do not have to deal with that problem as much as tropical astrologers do. And yet, there still is an issue, because here's NASA's other argument: the constellations are different sizes and shapes. So the sun spends different lengths of time lined up with each one. The line from Earth through the sun points to Virgo constellation for 45 days, but it points to Scorpius for only 7 days. And then they get into this whole Ophiuchus thing, which I'm not going to address here, but I do address in that video I've mentioned a couple times that you can find on YouTube, which is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. All right, so Theo, thank you so much for your patience. Please come back on, my friend. And I want to unpack a couple of these things. So first, I just want to get after this. Like for me, as I'm trying to show there, the tropical zodiac is completely based on what I like to say is Earth astrology. It's based on Earth spin and Earth's orbit of the sun. And we have this problem as tropical astrologers that many tropical astrologers don't know. And I will say, even the ones that do, I have a really hard time when I go see a professional astrologer speak about Taurus, and they show the Taurus glyph, and tropical astrologers, and then they show the Taurus constellation. Even though that tropical sign of Taurus is not aligned to that constellation, right? And it's like, well, you're kind of perpetuating like thousands of years old energy by doing that. And signs and constellations are different things. For sidereal astrologers, that's not so much of an issue, and yet it is, right? Because NASA's argument that these constellations of the zodiac are of distinctly different sizes, I mean, significantly different sizes, and yet the sidereal zodiac still divides the plane into 12 equal signs. Like, I'm born on October 24th. I'm first degree of Scorpio tropical. I'm like 6-7 degrees Libra sidereal, but the sun was aligned to the constellation called Virgo. So what am I? So I'll just call myself Gemini Brett, you know? But I mean, the best example is that most tropical zodiacs are beginning with the star Spica as the beginning of Libra, and that's a star in the constellation of Virgo, right? So there's something really unique, and I'm trying to show this mostly through the music and the shapes there, about 12 equal divisions of the ecliptic plane to define the zodiac, whether we're speaking sidereal or tropical cosmology. Do you agree?
Okay, so there's a lot there for me to respond to. So let me just go in order. Yes, I mean, one of the first things that I always, again, context is important. So there's 3 zodiacal references, as I call them, that show or indicate a different perspective on what may be the same thing. There's the constellational zodiac, which, as you rightly pointed out, different shapes, different lengths, all of that, yes. And one would probably say that that was the original astrological reference frame, because that's the first thing you see in the night sky. Astrology began by observing planetary motions in the stars, and that can only really be done at night. So, yes, the constellational zodiac is the first reference frame. And then what you had happen is that people had a sidereal reference frame, splitting now using a star as a reference point, and then dividing into 12 30-degree equal segments. And then coincidentally with that, people have had a calendrical system for seasons and agriculture and things on Earth, as far back as agriculture has existed. But that eventually became used astrologically. And so fast forward to today, and we've got these three zodiacal references. You've got a constellational reference, you've got a sidereal reference, and you've got a tropical, as you say, cardinal reference. And I think those are absolutely fine systems as they are. They do not need to be aligned with the constellations exactly, because that is not how their system of design was constructed to begin with. It's a different thing, I mean, basically I'm agreeing with you. What I'm saying is that the astronomers, if you were to bring them into the fold. This has to be explained to them, and they need to be educated to understand that, yes, what we are doing is that we know that there are three different reference frames when we practice. And certainly when I practice, because I use all three of them as much as I can. I love using patterns, for example, in my Western astrology work. Even in horary, I use them. So there's all these tools at our disposal and different perspectives at our disposal as astrologers in our toolkit. And I love using all the tools that are available as they are and not trying to mix them and match them together. So I'm very much about respecting each zodiacal reference as it is. And what I love about the constellational reference, for example, is the wealth of mythologies that go with that, and how much meaning, as you obviously know, can be brought in or extracted from those things. The other thing I wanted to point out was the sidereal reference frame. Yes, when we talk about the lunar mansions and the nakshatras in Vedic astrology, people also have this thing, well, are they 27 or are they 28? As you know, with the synodic versus the
sidereal.
The sidereal month, the solilunar months. So basically, and this goes back to the 12 idea, just to give a comment on that number from one perspective from Vedic astrology, is that the number 7 is very important, as well as the number 9. And Vedic astrology has different ways of combining these. One of them is we deal with 7 lokas, or 7 planes of consciousness, or operation of being, if you want to put it in a different way. And the first 3 are what we would call terrestrial, in a sense. They define the limit of our so-called embodied consciousness. And so that is a combination of 3 within the circle. So you're taking 27 and dividing it by 9. And so you're having 3, so the feminine triangle in the circle, that is the terrestrial, the form, the manifested out of the feminine womb of creation through the star and energy of Spica. You're having that both in the constellation of Virgo. So the womb of the divine feminine is providing the construction and the means by which the architect, as 0 degrees Libra, Deva energy, is constructing with. So there's a unity there you're seeing in the concept between the constellational reference of Virgo and the sidereal reference of Libra as a nakshatra, as chitra, as the energy of the star, as is defined in Vedic astrology. So that is almost like a filter coming through, to create the construction of karma perspective from which we are then looking at it, to understand it. And then, so that is
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to add just a few things there that totally agree from kind of the sacred geometry tradition, which I'm learning more kind of a Pythagorean approach, but they were so much more connected back then. But that if you show 3 circles of the same radius, right, which is one image of the Trinity, you'll find these beautiful kind of Celtic knot pattern, but you'll also see that it describes 7 distinct spaces within the shape. And it's one way that 3 shows 7. And as I showed by building the seed of life pattern there, which is 6 circles around 1, or 7 circles of the same radius, you see this 12-fold structure born. And so 3 begets 7 and 7 begets 12. And one thing we say in the geometry tradition is that the Trinity births the Virgin, and why the 7 is often described as the Virgin is because it is the first number that does not divide equally into 360. Like you can never draw a perfect 7-pointed star. The whole concept of a septile is in a sense abstract or transcendental because you cannot divide the circle by 7 equally, right? But there's this beautiful transmission of 3, 7, and 12. So I love hearing that. I love that it comes through Spica. I want to show 2 more things and then get into more of the kind of cosmological side of this conversation. And then I know it's late there, so I can show some of the precessional stuff. after you sign off if you want, or with you depending on how late you want to go.
Okay, well, I just have a few points I wanted to make.
Yeah, so let's hear
I
those
was making my
first. Sorry,
notes
and I'll show these others.
as you were going through.
Cool.
And just to finish that, so that is the oh, you've gone off. Okay,
I'm
so
here.
you're here. Okay, so just checking on the video stream. The other one is, so that was the triumvirate. Okay, the triangle and circle as the archetypal feminine, providing the structure for the zodiac and things like that, filtering through from the constellation to the sidereal. Then you also have the other four lokas or planes that are left, and that is the 28 nakshatra scheme, which is used for that, and that is 28 divided by 7, the number 7. So that is a four-sided, I mean, obviously it's a square within a circle, and that is representative of a masculine archetype. So when you put them together, you know, there's no debate about are they 27 or are they 28 nakshatras. It's about how you use, you must know what you're using it for, and therefore the tool is selected accordingly. So if you're taking them together, a triangle and a square, put them together, you've got 7 in the circle, and here we are. So we're saying the same thing, even though we're commenting from what may seem to be very different cultures. The other thing I wanted to mention was you spoke about, yes, Aries as the archetypal dawn, you know, where in the eastern horizon the stars seem to emerge from a point and expand out over the sphere of the, you know, diurnal arc of the sun and all the stars and planets. And there is a verse in the Rig Veda that speaks to this directly. It's in Rig Veda Mandala 1, verse 113, and it is basically idam shreshtam jyotisham jyotiraga chitra. The word chitra is there, which is quite interesting because that is the name used for speaker. Praketo ajanishta vibha. Now, ajanishta vibva means, ajanishta means that which is unborn becoming born. Ajanishta, at a point, it is becoming rooted, and vibva, it is emerging out from that point. So, and this is coming from a verse in the Rig Veda, which is a very ancient text that is in praise of the dawn. So I thought that was quite nice also from a cultural or historical point of view, that people have always thought about the eastern horizon containing this sort of energy that is giving birth in a pregnant sort of way to the day, and that is coming in that forceful way and overcoming the inertial darkness of the night. And I think that is a very appropriate way to think about the eastern horizon, as you've mentioned, as archetypal areas of energy. Okay, I think we can go back. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say about the sidereal is that there is also a system of using the nakshatras that have unequal lengths. Because what is actually happening is that we also learn that the moon goes through the nakshatras at different rates. Yes. So in some of them it's slower, some of them it's faster. And this, so if the moon is having different speeds in the same portion of the sky as a length, that's what's creating the different speeds of the moon. If you translate that speed calculation to a distance, for the moon to have equal speed through the sky, is going to be going through different lengths of nakshatras. Mm-hmm. So there are two ways that it is being dealt with, and it depends on which way, you know, you want to use it. But most people use the equal nakshatra division, and that's okay as long as the main tara, the main star of the nakshatra, is being honored as an indicator for that space. You know, so the energy of that lengthening or shortening of space is being contained in that main star of the nakshatra.
Right.
So it's almost like a weighted point.
Yeah, because an interesting thing, like, I don't know, I want to go too far here. I think this is like when we hang out, I get to talk to you about this at length. That's what I'm feeling. But I mean, the moon changes speed because she's different distances from the Earth. And the closer to Earth, the faster, and the further from Earth, the slower. The close point's called perigee, the far point's called apogee. And many astrologers these days track true black moon Lilith. If we look through that point, we see the lunar apogee. So when moon is with Lilith, she's a little further away, smaller in the sky, and that means also dimmer and slower. And so the interesting thing about using, and I love this just as like an astro nerd, right? That unequal divisions of the nakshatras based upon the moon's speed is that moon's speed is different in different nakshatras in different years, because Lilith is not a fixed point in the sky. So I'll just plant that seed, and let's please you and I sprout that together sometime. I really want to hear about that. I think it's really important. Some people probably have not even heard the word nakshatra that are listening here. And could you describe a bit about the lunar mansions?
Okay, so the lunar mansions, as we call them in Vedic astrology, nakshatra, and the lunar mansions in Arabic astrology were originally defined using stellar references also. But some people use them in a tropical reference frame now, so, who knows. So the lunar mansions are basically, if we want to just be quick about it, how far the moon travels in the course of a day, basically, in the sky, roughly. So that's what it is. It's saying this is where the moon is staying, is stationing, so-called, for that day. And so the archetype is seen as the moon as the masculine is interacting with and is being received by a form of the feminine, which is called a nakshatra. So the mythology is the moon and his 27 wives, going across the sky. And there's a huge story about that. As you know, mythology can get quite in depth, and the Vedic mythologies are very intricate because they're stories within stories within stories. So that's what it is. And each nakshatra is about 13 degrees and 20 minutes of the Sidereal zodiac. And the number 9 and number 4 come together. So what happens is that because the moon is the significator of the 4th house of rooting in the chart, and the moon controls the night sky, where the stars are being seen, and they're split, into these 28. 28 divided by 4, you get 9. Okay, and when you have the sun, which is the significator of the 9th house, you're splitting the 12, the 360 by 12, and you also get 9. So splitting 360 by 9, and you're getting 12. So within a sign, which is the sidereal sign, you're also having the sun and moon in step with each other in each sign. So the number 9 becomes a very important number for destiny, because both the sun and the moon are stepping in their respective fields, sidereal sign, sun, sidereal nakshatra, moon. They're both stepping together with the number 9 in the sky, and that's a number for destiny. And so that is what the nakshatras are also mapping in different ways, in a 4-fold way. The nakshatras are split into 4 steps of the moon each, because the moon rules the 4th house, naturally, etc. So that's just the nakshatras. They have energy to them. They have a deity associated with them. And I just want to say one thing about the deity thing. The translation of the word deva from Sanskrit as God is not correct as a translation. Deva comes from the word div, which means something to hold in light, an embodiment of light, as knowledge, as wisdom. So deva is, so for a fish, deva would be a shark. For a human being who wants to learn about, computers, a deva would be Steve Jobs, okay, or would have been Steve Jobs, for example.
What about
so a
Asura?
deva is an indicator for energy. So each nakshatra, sorry?
What about Asura?
So Sura and Asura is a different label. Sura is within the light, and Asura is not within the light. So Asura doesn't mean bad. It just means you
or
can't...
demon.
Yeah, it doesn't mean demon. So the translations have been, these colonial translations are really far off the mark. So we really need new scholars to be looking at Vedas and translating them, and some of the Jyotish texts as well. So nakshatra has a star, that's a main star. It has a deity, deva, embodiment of light associated with that, which gives you access to it. And that's one of the things we want to talk about blocking. Or are they blocking? Are the planets blocking? Are the planets channeling? But maybe
Well, yeah, I want to just reflect. There's a thing that I love to share the churning of the milk ocean and the birth of the Amrit and that Hindu
that is
story. And we have this pulling of the serpent Vasuki on Mount Meru to churn the ocean, and forces of light, as I like to say, the Devas, and forces of shadow, the Asuras on the other side. And then I always show that image of the earth with its pole, that being the churning pole in Mount Meru. And then the forces of the moon and the sun, in a sense, this is in a way the birth of Rahu Ketu. We don't want to say the whole story, but that this is a story of like the tides of the earth, which are affected by the moon and the sun, and how the earth always has half side shadow and half side light. For me, that's the Asuras and the Devas, at least in that story. So yeah, we take these things out of context, and I like that you share that's like a colonial misinterpretation, and I love hearing that true essence. I just want to check in. There was some like some of the math that you shared earlier, like some of the divisions were wrong, but I know you were saying the right thing, but just with some of the wrong numbers in a sense. But so 28 over 7 is 4, 27 over 9 is 3, and then 360 over 9 is the 40, or over 90 is 4. That seems.
Oh, sorry. What I meant was 360 divided by 4 would be 28, and that's the moon, and 360 divided by 9 would be 12, and that's the signs of the sun.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so let me just show a very important thing, I think, to folks here in Stellarium. I just kind of rewound, or actually fast forward to June 3rd, because this is the time of the next new moon. I have this cast for Melbourne, Australia. Still, I'll kind of go back and get more of a exact alignment between moon and sun. But this is a really important thing. When we show these new moons in an astrology chart, it looks like they're right on top of one another. And the truth is, unless it's an eclipse, unless the moon and the sun are meeting at one of the nodes, no eclipse for you, right? Usually the moon will be below or above the sun from our point of view. And you'll see that's the case for the June 3rd, 2019 eclipse here. And I've got this for Melbourne, Australia, although I'm looking south, which is interesting. And I don't want to get into that too much.
No,
but
don't go there. Don't go there.
The moon has a different course through the sky than the sun does. And so when we're talking zodiac, typically we're talking about the sun's path, the ecliptic plane. And usually when we bring a star, like let's say, and many will say the star Sirius is at 13 degrees tropical Cancer. Well, Sirius is very far from the ecliptic plane. So in that regard, we're actually drawing a perpendicular line and projecting to the plane. Theo mentioned another very powerful way to work with fixed stars before, which is called parans, which would be actually more based upon the time that that star was actually rising, not the degree that it projected to rose, or culminating or setting or rooting down below, etc. And I know we're sharing some things that are very advanced here, and may different levels of ears hear different things in these transmissions, as it always is when we speak about magic. So with the nakshatras, this for me, it's a very sidereal thing, and the stories are that. And it's like the constellational stories that you mentioned before and said the West has these rich mythos. Well, we know that is very true in the Hindu tradition as well. Like incredibly rich, dynamic, deep, many-leveled, great tales of these sacred places of the sky. And yet the West also has this thing, as you mentioned before, kind of agricultural systems based upon these 4 marking points of the years, the equinoxes and solstices. And those came in to define, or rather describe, the tropical zodiac. So one question I have is, in the sidereal zodiac, which does not start or begin any sign with an equinox or a solstice point, do you use those points? Are those points seen in any way as special points in the sidereal zodiac?
Okay, so I've had this question a couple of times. There's one level. Okay, so there's, I think, 2 answers to this question. The first one is that from a technical point of view, yes. So there's something called bala, so it means strength. And there's various technical calculations about assessing the strength of a planet, just as they are in Western traditional astrology. One of these is called Ayana Bala. So how far along are the planets from these points, these tropical cardinal points that you mentioned. So the tropical zodiac is called Sayana, which is with Ayana. and the Sidereal zodiac is called Nirayana, which is without that. And they are both used. They are both used and taught in Vedic astrology. Arguably, yes, the tropical Sayana is used more for environmental things like weather prediction and things like that, agricultural reasons, predicting rain, because it was always seen as more, seasonal environmental reference, us on Earth and our relationship with our primary star as a localized starlight, if I would put it that way. And the Sidereal Nirayana has always been used to see, well, where is all this coming from, sort of thing, and coming with what. So that's kind of where I see it. The one place is in Ayana Bala calculation. The other place is that there are different schemes of timing used in Vedic astrology. One of them is a timing through the nakshatras, and that is where the precession as an equinoctial point in its precession is mapped through the nakshatras. Gotcha. Not just mapped through the sidereal signs or the constellational reference behind it, but the nakshatra sidereal that the precession of the equinox is going through. Cool. Right now it's in early degrees of Pisces, and that's Uttara Bhadrapada nakshatra. So it is that is a different timing system that shows from a mundane perspective for the world, things that are happening. So those are the two places I know that it is being used. Cool. But not in the same way as it.
I want to get into precession. I want to ask you a couple cosmological questions first. But there's one thing I want to do for some Southern Hemisphere tropical astrologer folks here. I'll just ask you, said that, these tropical points are used, and even I love that the kind of sidereal means, or not the sidereal, but the Vedic name means not with those points, and then the tropical zodiac means with those points. And can I ask, are planets seen to be stronger if they're close to either equinox or solstice degree?
Yeah, it is stronger.
Yeah, so they're just kind of at those cardinal direction points, and there's a strengthening there.
It's like a routing sort of,
Yeah, so, and then you have found it very powerful because the tropical does reflect seasonal energies, and because seasonal energies change with your actual particular location on the Earth, the closer you are to the equator, the less extreme the seasons are, and the extremes of the seasons obviously opposite in between the North and South hemisphere. So you found, as you shared earlier, it to be a powerful tool to actually flip the tropical signs between the hemispheres. Is that part of the Vedic tradition too, or is that something that like newer astrologers like yourself are finding?
That's definitely not part of the Vedic tradition.
Okay.
I would not even whisper it because it's not seen that way.
I got you. I mean, a lot of the astrological traditions were certainly founded. We can see evidence of this even in the way that we draw a chart in the Northern Hemisphere. And should there be adaptations for the Southern Hemisphere? Like, I would love for folks to actually show the ascendant on the right hemisphere chart, because the sky goes that way, right? But that's kind of a tale for another time. I do want to offer just a quick image and contemplation that helped me feel why the tropical zodiac can work for both hemispheres without being reversed, because it was something I really struggled with for a time. I mean, why are assigned signs if they don't align to constellations? That's a significant challenge. And we find in tropical astrology, well, it's because they're seasonal. Well, okay, if they're seasonal, again, why would you say that the sun rules Leo in the middle of Southern Hemisphere winter? That seems weird, right? Correct. And so that's another challenge that sidereal astrology doesn't have to face. They're like, look, it's aligned to that star regardless of where you are. Right. But let me show you something that I found. And I'll say one more thing. The other thing that really brought me into this was kind of contemplating like the evolutionary astrology idea. And I know this is very different in Vedic, but that the North Node, and I'll use this word Rahu, though it's a different kind of cosmology, is that the North Node is the place like of a future, and that the South Node is where we're coming from. This is a very common theme in Western astrology, really in modern times. That's not true to the tradition of Western astrology either. In some regards, especially in the medical thing, you can see glimpses of that, but that's used by many modern Western astrologers, especially evolutionary astrology paradigms, that we come from the South Node and we go to the North Node. And I could see that in the regards that in my own cosmology, I see the sun as spirit, the one thing, at least our local representative of this, that the moon is soul, is a complete reflection of that one thing in a very unique way to earth matter. That's just my own particular cosmology, and it's not unique, but that's how I'm rolling at this time, right? But so when I see the North Node, from the Northern Hemisphere's point of view, this is where the moon is crossing up towards the heaven over the sun's path. That's what this arm is supposed to represent here, okay?
Right.
And that the South Node is like this. And so if I see moon as soul and sun as spirit, the South Node would be where soul is descending down to matter through the realm of spirit. And that feels very incarnational with me, and I could get down with that. But then when I started studying the astronomy more and we started traveling to the Southern Hemisphere more, I was like, wait a second. In the Southern Hemisphere, the South Node is where the moon goes up towards the heavens. So
like a relative switch.
Right. So shouldn't I have to shift that? That would be like the same thing as, well, an analog anyway, to you shifting the signs, that here we are in the Northern Hemisphere moving. We'll say we're in Taurus, it's the spring, but what you're saying is that Taurus is a sign of the spring. So for the Southern Hemisphere, if you're going to go tropical, it's more like Scorpio right now. Okay. So I was really struggling with this. Well, this idea of up and down, like the whole zodiac seems to be flipped upside down between the hemispheres' point of views, right? And then I asked this question to myself, well, look, the sun is not static like we used to think it was. We're actually moving through space. And the sun is moving through space, and all of the planets are moving with the sun through space. And so where's it moving? And it turns out we've known about this for some time. So let me just show a couple slides that might help this a little bit. Here's this image of the tropical zodiac that I showed before. And here's this idea of, well, why don't I need to flip it upside down if I'm going to put the other hemisphere on top? And this is the key to me. It's called the apex of the sun's way. Our sun is moving towards the star Vega. And we've actually known about this for hundreds of years, like William Herschel, who's the modern discoverer, along with his sister Caroline Herschel, of the planet Uranus in the late 18th century, also was into this idea of the apex of the sun's way. So when you're driving a car on the highway, the trees in front of you seem to be opening up, and the trees behind you seem to be collapsing in on one another, yeah? And this is happening with our sky very slowly. The stars around Vega are very slowly distancing themselves from one another. And the stars around Sirius, which is on the opposite side of the sky, are very slowly closing in on one another. And so we've known for a long time that our whole solar system is moving away from Sirius and towards Vega. Now here's the rub. Vega never sets at Earth's North Pole. Vega is a northern star. And Sirius never rises at Earth's North Pole. Sirius never sets at Earth's South Pole. So we're not moving due north. That would be towards Polaris. But we are moving north. And Vega, and I'll get back to this, is at one time in the precessional cycle our North Star, the closest thing to it. So Earth is literally, because the sun is literally moving north. So when Earth sees the moon cross like the North Node from south latitudes to north latitudes, regardless if that means if it's for the Northern Hemisphere going up towards the heavens, or from the Southern Hemisphere actually coming down to the ground, it is literally moving towards the future because our planet is moving north. And so when I honor the tropical zodiac not as a seasonal thing, but when I look at the roots of the seasons as the directions of the Earth themselves, given that the Earth is moving through space like this with the sun, and actually very quickly, there's like literally a motion coming down here like this. Is like, you know, we could say it's like a wind. And that's a tricky thing to call it. Astronomers might, you know, I'd not even whisper that in the astronomical realms, right? But there's very different about that motion that we're moving towards and the motion that we're moving away from. And so this actually works as an astronomical proof, if you will. That's a challenging word, but for this cosmology of towards the North Node and from the South Node. And if that's true as well, it would apply to the equinox points and the solstice points, the equinox points being an analog to the moon's nodes for the Earth-Sun relationship, and the solstice points being an analog to the moon's bendings for the Sun-Earth relationship. And so that's a way that I've come to feel okay about utilizing the Northern Hemisphere seasonal tropical zodiac for Southern Hemisphere natives. And I just actually didn't plan on offering that, but I really wanted to, because I know that especially the Cosmic Intelligence Agency is rooted in Australia, there's going to be a lot of Southern Hemisphere folks listening to this. So I would say try flipping your signs, but don't feel like you have to.
Yeah. So I believe the tropical zodiac is fluid across the hemispheres, and and that goes whether you're born there, whether you move there and move up and down. So because I've had clients that have moved hemispheres, and suddenly my readings are not hitting home. You know, and then I just flip, and of course the north node ruler is going to be different, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, this is working, everything is coming down to the day predictions working. So of course that I've tested online as well with people, and people are getting career indications incorrect and things because the signs are all opposite. So but what I want to say about what you said about Vega, and also Vega, the direction where we're going to, I would say that there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of ancient wisdom in these systems that are not just technical and are not just about the calculations. For example, the nakshatra Mula, which is the first 13 or so degrees of Sidereal Sagittarius, is called root. Mula means rooting. And that is the direction of the galactic center, which is a kind of rooting. But ancient people somehow knew to call that part of the sky, well, at least in Vedic tradition, rooting, right? Mula. And the star where Vega is, that is the same star you say we are moving towards. In the Sidereal zodiac, it's sort of in that in-between region between Sagittarius and Capricorn, where we have this intercalary nakshatra, the 28th nakshatra inserted. That is indicating, it's called the place of Hari. Hari being another name for Vishnu, who is the sustainer of the universe in the Vedic cosmology. And that is the star indicating, or that is the direction in space indicating that archetype's presence. So who is sustaining the light of the universe, sustaining all these things in motion, they're new to say that in that direction of space is where we look to propitiate or to connect with the sustainer of this whole thing being pulled somehow everywhere and set in motion. And there's many verses in the Veda describing the motions of Vishnu and the steps and all these, being set in motion by that archetype. So it's kind of strange that, not strange, but I just wish there was astronomers doing astrology, because that would make our lives a lot easier. And it just shows the beauty of understanding the context, the proper context of whatever system you're using. Like I said, I flip for Southern Tropical as a routine in my practice, and even for horrors it works so much better. But again, that's a new thing, and I'm okay with people being uncomfortable with that for now.
Yeah.
But that's how evolution happens.
Yeah, if I think of the tropical zodiac as a seasonal thing, then it makes sense to flip it. If I think of it as a directional thing, it doesn't necessarily, but it could.
Yes.
Because the north and the south directions work differently in the hemispheres. Like the south for the northern hemisphere is where the sun culminates. But that happens in the north for the southern hemisphere. So
correct.
Actually add to your argument that the things should be flipped. But my general idea is that if we're now moving north, that's true for the whole globe. And there's actually something spoken that whisper of this in some of the traditions that come out of the original people of Australia. And I could get into other myths in that regard. But I want to get back to something you said before, which is this idea of galactic center and this place of root, because we also know that that Rahu is set, or is it Ketu? I'm sorry, that is exalted at 3 degrees Sagittarius.
It's exalted in Sagittarius, yes.
Sorry, and is it Rahu or Ketu that's exalted?
It's Ketu.
Right, and sorry, and Ketu at 3 degrees Sagittarius. Now, in the tropical zodiac, that's a place in space, and that's cool. But in the sidereal zodiac, that is the galactic center, right? Because
correct.
In the tropical, we often say that galactic center is 27 degrees Sagittarius. Well, subtract 24, you get 3 degrees Sagittarius, and there, this degree that even Western astrologers or tropical astrologers are using for the exaltation degree of Ketu, it is galactic center, and therefore the exaltation degree for Rahu at 3 degrees Gemini in the sidereal zodiac, that's the galactic anti-center. That's within what the Lakota call the sacred hoop, and I don't want to go too deep there. But I think that's a pretty incredible proof that at least some of the roots of our rules, and we know that the exaltations for Rahu and Ketu come from the Vedic tradition to the West.
Yeah, and
some of them are sidereal tradition.
The usage of Rahu and Ketu from an EA, evolutionary astrology point of view, as this is the way you're going, this is where you're coming from. From the Vedic astrology point of view, it's the opposite. So Rahu is the reason why you're here, as the material pull, the temptation, the apple that has brought you through the masculine zodiac and the feminine zodiac, the Adam and the Eve down. So it's seen as a sort of, just because something tickles your mind doesn't mean it's good. And so that's how it's sort of, seen. It's a material attraction point in that way. Necessarily so to be reborn in the philosophy of Vedic astrology, of reincarnation. And Ketu is seen as a ray. That's what one of the meanings of the word Ketu is, a ray. So it is.
Sorry, Theo. Did you say a way, like W-A?
A ray, like a ray of light. So
a ray,
and it's not technically, sun ray, but it's indicating beyond the starlight, the ray, the source. That's actually the source, the ray from the source. So Ketu is the polarity of Rahu, in the sense that is indicating the way out of the system, beyond the stars where you came from. Right. So because the polarity of...
I'm sorry, I've seen that in the Vedic cosmology where Rahu and Ketu are actually kind of beyond the planets. So I want to ask you this question first, because I read this thing from the NASA astronomers as this challenge earlier, right? This is on the space page. Like, this is like the page for kids, okay? NASA, who many see as the authorities of all things space, and then some, for some reason, would branch astrology into that. And though this is a government organization that vehemently denies astrology, people are going to NASA for astrological advice, which for me is the greatest astrological mystery there is. But anyway, they say this thing, which I think is really key, where at least the writers of this article, and I think this is true for most astronomers and actually many astrologers, even tropical astrologers I meet, that this is kind of what they believe the cosmology, or maybe the mechanism of the as above, so below is this statement here. When Mimi says I'm a Leo, she means that on her birthday, the imaginary line from Earth through the sun and out into space on the other side of the sun points to the constellation Leo. And we heard in that other expression that she would say that she's born under the constellation Leo, but they show that that's untrue. She's actually born under the constellation of the Crab. And so what's very important for me, at least, to say this with absolute astronomical authority is that, look, if your cosmology is that the essence of the signs of the zodiac are coming to you from the constellations, don't be a tropical astrologer. Because if you're saying that, NASA is very right. Like, I cannot say my sun is in the sign of Scorpio if I think Scorpio is a constellational thing. Right. And so if I believe that energy of Scorpio, or what I call that as a tropical astrologer, is coming from the constellations, then I should not call myself a Scorpio because my sun is there. Right. So then what is tropical astrology? And again, I say it's Earth astrology, and I could get into what that is, but I'm more interested in asking you, how are the signs described in the Sidereal or the Vedic tradition of like how are those energies like Sagittarius, Scorpio, Libra, etc. Like what is creating them?
Right. So first thing to say is that the signs do not always have the same meanings in the two systems because the whole setup of Vedic astrology is very different. Okay, compared to the Western tradition, the amount of elements is different. The elements in Vedic astrology are not located in the sublunar sphere as they are in the Western Hermetic tradition. They are located beyond space. So it's a very different sort of archetype here. And the operation of the signs is seen as, firstly, an indication of karma, because the whole underpinning, and some people have even, again, in this sort of like, I am right sort of way with minimal research, have said that it shouldn't be called Vedic astrology because there's no evidence of horoscopes in the Veda. So I'm like, okay, it's a long-standing oral tradition that has gone beyond the textbooks hundreds of years ago. So you're not going to find something written down, my friend. But the second point is that it is called Vedic astrology also partly because the underpinning of the philosophies that are ingrained in not just the concepts of Vedic astrology, but the techniques themselves are coming from Vedic philosophy. Okay, so when we talk about the sun signs, that's a huge topic on its own. It's called Rashi, and there's many meanings for the word Rashi. One of them means a quantity, and you can look at that as a quantity of light, quantum, okay? But you can also look at it, Rashi, part of the word is Ra, and the other part of the word is Shi. And these are the two other names for the nodes, Rahu and Sikhi, which is known as Ketu commonly. And Rahu and Ketu, yes, they are polar opposites, and they have polar sort of agenda in that way from a soul descent, ascent point of view. But Rahu has a responsibility as the enemy of the sun, primarily, to destroy the signs, the Rashi, because he's always eating it up. That's how the conception is. Whereas Ketu, which is traditionally seen as the enemy of the moon primarily, is more affected, the moon is more affected by Ketu, has the responsibility of destroying the nakshatras, because Ketu is from beyond. So you could look at it, Rahu as a terrestrial magnet, and Ketu is further out there into space. And it's a way, because they were both one body called Svarbhanu in the mythology, this great demon or asura that is occupying the unknown space between where we are and where we come from. And Vishnu is the one that cut it to give the polarity so that we could manifest for the sake of evolution in a potential different sort of way, if you're following me. So when it comes to creating the signs, that is how they are deconstructed. That is how the whole signs and nakshatras are deconstructed. What the signs are then held by, the moon is protecting the signs from a life point of view, because nakshatras control life energy. The quantum of life breath is coming through the moon, okay, the nakshatra. And the sun is protecting against Rahu. The sun is providing the energy, the vitality. So there are 12 forms of the sun called Aditya. Remember that same word. Dithi is order, is order. So Aditya, Dithi is chaos, Aditi is order. Adityas are 12 forms of the sun who are children of Aditi. They are children of order. So the sun is a very strong concept of regularity, consistency, dependability, because that's the sun archetype in Vedic astrology.
So
in terms of
the 12 signs are like so the 12 forms. The sun is like the 27 nakshatras or wives of the moon.
Yeah, so there are 12 Aditya that are responsible. Aditya, they are moving that. Okay, just as the sun is a chariot in the sky, from a mythological point of view.
Mm-hmm.
They are responsible for activating the energy in that sign. It follows the concept that everything on Earth in terms of energy has come from space, right? Has come from out there. So the solar operation in the space of quantum called Rashi is indicating the energy of that. So Scorpio, the sun in Scorpio, is indicating energy from petroleum resources on Earth, for example, from the dead things. It's like that. So it's literally it's sort of like an E equals MC squared sort of encapsulation of the principle before Einstein came on the scene. The sun in Vedic astrology, the Rashi, is an energy amount that is being activated or indicated in a way. And the sun through the signs is activating that, is indicating that activation on Earth.
And so tropically, I mean, we really experience that because the sun through the signs is tracking the seasonal energies. But this is not true. I'm with precession. I mean, so, you know, as we saw earlier that the NASA's example of Mimi, August 4th, like she calls herself a Leo, that's a tropical thing, but the sun was actually aligned to the constellation of the Crab. And so with precession, I think I want to show some slides around that, but I can wait till after because I know it's late there. But the tropical signs are slowly shifting through the constellations and backwards. And the full cycle, most of us teach it's about 26,000 years for the signs to move all the way around through the circle of the zodiacal constellations. And so eventually this August 4th will not just be in the Crab, it will be in the Twins, and then it will be in the Bull a couple of thousand years later, and then in the Ram, etc. So the tropical signs are in no way fixed to the constellations of the zodiac. That changes.
And they don't need to be.
And that's why I said earlier, the only star that the tropical signs are about, and I'm not saying the fixed stars don't matter in any way, right? Like they all have a song to sing. But I'm just saying that the way that the tropical zodiac is defined, the only star that matters besides seeing where the signs are with the reference points of stars in a time is our star, Sol, the sun, right? For the sidereal signs, they'll be aligned to the same constellations forever. It is literally a star-based zodiac. And that's what most astrologers, I find, and certainly all astronomers believe the zodiac to be, something that comes to us from the stars, right?
I suppose people have said variously that it's something you can see, you know. Like I said, for example, people have said, well, what's the reason for the modalities in Vedic astrology? Because they're not seasonal. As cardinal modalities strictly the beginning of a season. And that makes sense. The turning point is indicating some effect on Earth from an environmental point of view. So they say, well, that can't be right in Vedic because it's not seasonal. And I say, well, it doesn't need to be, it's sidereal. The modality in Vedic astrology is indicating the nature of the karma, the fixity of the karma. So a movable, we don't use the word cardinal, but a movable sign like Aries is indicating karma or situation that can be easily changed.
Right.
A fixed sign is something that is very difficult to change. An immutable sign, something in between. So it's because, again, the underpinning of the context of the Vedic philosophy of transmigration of souls and karma is the basis. And that's the starting point. So what I would say is that if somebody doesn't believe in karma and reincarnation as a theory for life, times, they might find Vedic astrology difficult to get a handle on.
Right, because the philosophy, the cosmology is all dependent on this Vedic philosophy. And therefore, as you're arguing, it should be called Vedic astrology. There's no problem with that. You don't need a specific example of an astrological chart in the Rig Veda to call something that is based on the philosophy Vedic astrology. I very much appreciate that. But yeah, we can see this. Well, we can't see the sun moving through the constellations because the sun is very bright. But we can see that it's a different constellation rising just before sunrise, and that's going to change as the sun is distancing itself from those stars. We can see what constellations culminating in the middle of the night. There's all sorts of different ways that we can track the sidereal movement of the sun or the sun through the constellations or the stars of the ecliptic plane. We can also see tropical signs And there are many ancient devices to do so, and some modern ones. I have some on the porch right there. Like, I literally have the signs of the tropical zodiac written on the rail out here where there's a view of the eastern horizon, because I'm watching the sun move from 0 Aries at equinox time north.
Along the horizon.
It happens everywhere on Earth, regardless of seasonal energy. The sun moves north on the eastern and western horizons from 0 Capricorn tropical to 0 Cancer tropical. And then it stops, turns around. There you go. Tropicos, meaning turnaround, or solstice. The sun stops. And look at the Cancer glyph. The sun moves this way for 6 months, stops and turns around and moves back. Actually, I've seen a lot of astronomical evidence or tropical evidence in the glyphs that we use. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that tropical astrology is right and sidereal astrology is wrong. I believe they're both right, and there's this interface. So as I was saying before, the tropical signs are going to shift through the stars. So if you think you're, you know, people say this all the time, like the Leos get the constellation of the lion tattooed on their arm, and it's like, no, actually the sun was aligned to the crab, and you might want to add that at least, right?
It's true, Brett, because I think astrologers need to be educated. Like I'm saying, know the tools, not just the tools that you use. Get familiar with the tools around you also, so that I think we need to start getting to a place in astrology where we are all understanding each other and the tools that we all are using, and respecting and honoring that, and presenting a sort of unified front publicly, because at the moment the distinct views are becoming quite separatist, and I find it a little bit worrying, because actually we are the ones that should be demonstrating unity through the archetypes of divination, as opposed to, you know, wholly identifying with one and then putting our guns out. So, you know, I've found some astrologers on Facebook who are celebrating a Taurus new moon, but then they put the constellation for Taurus up on a crystal map grid, and I'm like, okay, they're quite, it's sidereal Aries, but okay.
Right. For me, that's a very significant issue. Some of my hero astrologers do that, and I'm like, look, you're literally perpetuating the age of Aries, and I'm not sure we want to do that. But so let me finish this, that like, yes, the tropical signs are shifting through the constellations, and people need to know that. The sidereal signs are shifting through the seasons. So while, yes, today, like tropical Leo is aligned to the crab constellation, in a couple of thousand years will be aligned to the twins, etc. For the sidereal zodiac, there's no issue with changing against the constellations, but eventually northern hemisphere sidereal Leo will happen in the middle of winter, right? So this tropical zodiac shifts through the stars, and the sidereal zodiac shifts through the seasons. And there's this meshing that happens. And for me, I believe this is actually the evolutionary mechanism for the shifting of the essence of the signs themselves. That as like a tropical sign shifts through the constellations, for example, today we'll use NASA's example of Mimi, August 4th. She's a Leo, and that's true in the tropical zodiac, but it's aligned to the constellation of Cancer. There's something about tropical Leo, sidereal Cancer that's very different than August 4th, 2,000 years from now, when it will be tropical Leo, sidereal Gemini. Do you see what I mean? And so you get this interface of two sets of 12 signs, which unfortunately have the same name, and that might change over time, we'll see. But that gives you 144 possibilities, where there can be a Leo, Leo, Leo Cancer, Leo Gemini, Leo Taurus, Leo Aries, etc. And that meshing of the tropical signs through the constellation, or through the stars, or the star signs, the sidereal signs through the seasons, will create this emanation that will assist in the incarnational process of humanity at large, I believe.
I mean, in Vedic astrology, we make use of 6 Vedic seasons, and they're tied to the sidereal sign. So they can be looked at as seasons of the mind, whatever way you want to look at it. So there's very different way of handling, like I said, elements, seasons, everything is handled in a very different way. So we don't need to necessarily have 4 seasons in Vedic astrology.
Well, but let me ask, even those seasons, Theo, like if they're tied to stars, is one of the seasons known to be a hot time and one of the seasons known to be the coldest time?
Yeah, so it's correct that the seasons change across the nakshatra, across the sidereal references. All I'm saying is that there are 6 and not 4,
Got you.
because the sun is known as the creator of the seasons. So the remaining 6 visible planets get rulership of one of the 6 seasons, and so they're used in a totally different way of interpretation of the chart from a really. You can have a seasonal interpretation of the chart in Vedic astrology also, which is what most people are not aware about. The other thing you mentioned was I had lost the point. You see,
Well, let
but
me
yeah.
ask you something that I've heard you speak about before, which I thought was so cool. You shared a bunch about the sun and the moon and about Rahu and Ketu, but what about
Yeah.
the planets in the Vedic cosmology or
Mm,
philosophy? What are they and what do they do?
right. So Parashara, which is one of the primary quote-unquote sages that we refer to, was wrote in the primary astrological text, has said that the purpose of the grahas, they are taken on, they are incarnations of that Vishnu we talked about, to provide people the facility of interacting with their karma for the sake of evolution. And at the same time, it is said, by that process, overcome anti-evolutionary forces. So that's the highest purpose of the graha. They are blocking starlight, they're blocking something coming through cosmically, or rays, whatever you want to call it. Now we know there's so many things hurtling through space, not just light. Okay, there's so many things within light that is being carried. So that is being blocked and causing any effect. But at the same time, we know the graha, so they're called graha because grahana means to eclipse. So they are called graha because they are having that operation in the sky and thereby having effect. Again, in alignment with the philosophical makeup of Vedic astrology. At the same time, we know that the graha also reflecting the individual sunlight, the localized starlight. Okay, so the karma is being indicated by the grahana operation, and we are identifying with it very strongly through the reflection of the individual sunlight, which is one. So there's this duality thing that is happening between the sidereal zodiac and the tropical, both interacting together to create this perception of duality and karma in its structural aspect and its identification aspect. Now, the signs do not have the same names because I am only using the English names for the sake of conversation, right? They're called, the Sanskrit names are there, Mesha, Vrishabha, Mithuna. Gemini is a man and a woman in sexual embrace. It's not twins, So the conceptualization of even the signs is also different. But the graha we come to the question of lordship, from this. What are the planets doing? So the planets are seen as graha in that way, and thereby cosmic effects. That's the baseline sort of understanding of them. But for the sake of karma and our interaction for evolutionary point of view, once we transmute that, then in a way we have access to that light that is so-called being blocked, and we go beyond that. So there are channels in a way. There's various levels of the graha. There's the devata, adidevata, pratidevata, levels of the graha which can be interacted with. So it also filters into the magical aspects of Vedic astrology and the, omenology and things like that.
So there's a set of 12 tropical signs and a set of 12 sidereal signs, yeah?
Yes.
Do they have the same names, the two sets, or are they different names?
The different. So the Vedic astrology, those who practice don't call it Vedic astrology, it's called Jyotish. Vedanga Jyotish is using it in conjunction with everything in the Vedas, not just astrology textbooks. Okay. Then there's Aries is called Mesha. Taurus is Vrishabha. Gemini is Mithuna. Cancer is Karkata or Karka. Leo is Simha. Virgo is Kanya. Libra is Tula. Scorpio is Ali, also called Vrishchika. And Sagittarius is called Dhanu, which is literally meaning bow. Okay. And Capricorn is Makara. and which is like a big crocodile, python, or some sort of creature like that. It's not a sea goat. And Aquarius is Kumbha, the pot, and Mina is Pisces. And you can take the same portion of the sky, and Siderealists are calling it Kumbha because it's a reflection of mind. Aquarius is ruled by Rahu in Vedic astrology, so it's the water in the brain. It is narcotics, it's substance use, it is the delusional aspect of the collective in a negative way, so that your rational faculty is not being used properly and having sunlight. Okay, so it's quite a harsh sign from that point of view in terms of karma, because it indicates deterioration in the mind. Okay, Saturn also has rulership, but Rahu is the primary rulership of the sign. And that same portion of the sky, which is in Vedic astrology in a negative way, can be associated with substance use and abuse, is called by Westerners Pisces, substance use and abuse.
Right, which is really interesting, right? Because here we have this agreement energetically, right? So I think this is really important. You said this earlier. It's a very important point, right? Like, look, Vedic Scorpio is not necessarily described in the same way that Western Scorpio is. And it's not only like the philosophical, cosmological differences, which is obviously going to be a significant contributor, but it might just be that there is a particular place in space, or a particular place, I'll say from a terrestrial cosmology, in the alignment of Earth's directions that holds an energy like addictions. And in the Sidereal Zodiac in our time, and always, really, that's like the Aquarius realm, and in the tropical zodiac it is currently in the Pisces realm, right? So that these things might shift over time, and that kind of goes to, I'll use the word support, though maybe not, that this idea that there can be a mechanism for the evolution of the archetypes themselves. But what I'm wondering, like you just named the 12 Vedic names for the 12 signs, Aries through Pisces, but do you use the same names if you're considering the set of 12 from a sidereal point of view in the Vedic tradition and the tropical point of view in the Vedic tradition, or are there different names for the two sets of sidereal and tropical? Or are there even 12 tropical signs, or you're just looking at the equinox and solstice points in the sidereal set of 12?
So we use the same name as in like the Sanskrit names.
Yeah. And you don't have, and see that I love that, because there's not a problem with it, right? But it's going to be a weird thing. Like, it's a weird thing for Western and for tropical astrologers. Again, like, you know, I'm Scorpio sun, but the sun was actually aligned to the Virgin constellation when I was born. Right? I call it that instead of Virgo to differentiate signs and constellations. But I feel, again, this meshing, and I'll show some animations of this shifts. I have one more question, because I thought I might show some other kind of astronomical support for the glyphs themselves. Do Vedic astrologers use the same glyphs for the 12 signs that we use in the West? And do you know when those...
No, not as such. We just use the names.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think these glyphs, and you know, I have not yet found an astrologer, including the great academic master Robert Hand, who knows when the glyphs first came on the scene. And it's like, it's the weirdest thing to me, you know?
It's the holy grail in Western astrology, I think.
It is one of them. So, Theo, let me just check in. It's late there. Do you want
No, I'm okay. I've got the energy, so
okay, cool.
Once talks last.
Right on. Well, let me just show, I think it's maybe 3 minutes of some different kind of what I like to call earth astrology, or being out with my feet on the ground, witness of the heavenly happenings, where I found some, I guess, essence of the glyphs anyway of the signs from a tropical or earth astrology cosmology. So I'll ask you to mute yourself, if you will, and I'll show a few more slides and come back on here. All right, buttons. Here we go. All right, so this is what I was mentioning before, kind of at length now, of the Aries glyph describing the eastern sky. And I'll say that this is Stellarium astronomy software, which, by the way, is free for Mac and PC. Check it out. It's a really cool thing to cast your chart, not only astrology style, but astronomy style, and see where the alignments are. This is cast for the equator. And if you look due east at the equator, the sky moves like this. And I think you can see how it moves just like the essence of the Aries glyph. Okay, and what's odd to me there is that Aries glyph looks nothing like the constellation that we call Aries, okay, which is like these stars here. There's 3 bright stars, Hamal and Sheridan, and we draw it usually, some draw it as a ram's horn or like the back of the ram, but the constellation that actually looks like the Aries glyph is the fishes, the 2 fish tied together, which I find to be a really intriguing thing. And I really think that the Aries glyph is more describing the way that the eastern sky works. I love that Theo read to us from the Vedas earlier, and speaking about, and I'll just call it in like the Western tradition, the fountain of youth that the eastern sky is, because the earth is falling in that direction. Earth spins west to east. We see the heavens everywhere on the earth rising in the east. And it's like this eternal fountain of youth, which in and of itself has some kind of, at least Pisces water imagery if we use the Western elemental associations. So here's March equinox sunrise around 1 AD, a couple thousand years ago in Athens, Greece. And you'll see that at that time, the Pisces constellation was rising due east and kind of looked like that Aries glyph, right? Now I'll say that Athens, Greece, like where I am in the Bay Area of California, is about 37 degrees northern latitude on Earth. And to keep the motion of the sky, I have to tip that Aries glyph 37 degrees towards the midheaven in the south. And interestingly, when I do that, that looks even more like the Pisces constellation. I wonder how long these 2 fish have been tied together. In fact, the myth of Venus and Cupid being tied together, or I should maybe speak Greek, where it would be Aphrodite and Eros, right? That was written around that time, perhaps. Software lets me take the ground away. And now I can see that the sky in the east, and this again, equator, works like the Pisces glyph. Everything gathering towards the east and then separating, and stars that rise south of east heading to the south and north of east heading towards the north. The Libra glyph for me is sunset. So yeah, we say the scales and balance in this, but especially when you see the sun setting on a line, which you can do at certain times and places on Earth, I really experience that Libra glyph in nature. This kind of advanced idea but many of astrologers know about Antisha. And you can watch this on the horizon, the sun just moving north and south, 6 months north and 6 months south on the eastern horizon at sunrise throughout the year, or the western horizon at sunset throughout the year. And I see the Cancer glyph there. Another seasonal experience that we have of the sun is that it gets highest in summer, right, in midday, and lowest in winter. And it climbs up for 6 months, and it climbs down for 6 months, and I believe that that's the Gemini glyph. All right, Libra again. This to me is the Sagittarius glyph, and why we speak about the archer maybe in the arrow. Now this is a stretch because, you know, this is an awareness of Earth on the spin axis, the axis of day, tilted in respect to the axis of the year. But I mean, it's hard not for me to see this Earth in the pole and the plane of the Earth rotation, the day tilted in respect to the year, in the Sagittarius glyph. This one shows the Capricorn glyph, but well, I'll just go there. It's a little complex, but as I said earlier, at 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, the sun shines over the Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south of the equator on Earth. And then as we move towards equinox time, the sun is climbing. If you want to see north is up, arbitrary, but the sun will be climbing to the equator. And I think at least this old version of the Capricorn glyph is showing that motion from the Tropic of Capricorn to the Tropic of Cancer and back. All right, so seasonal flip, we got into that a little bit, at least as much as I want to. And I'm gonna get out of here because that's a presentation for a different time. And I want to show a little bit about precession of the equinoxes, because we've been talking about this. Let me show you just a quick image of the astronomy, and it comes down to what are known as the first 3 motions of Earth. So one is spin, right? I started there, the primary motion, day, the sword in our stone, the spine of Gaia, Earth's spin axis, and the plane is Earth's equator projected into space, the celestial equator, day. Right, and that would be seen as the sun or any of the planets through the houses. Year would be the ecliptic plane. That is the plane of Earth's orbit about the sun, right? Or from Earth's point of view, sun about the earth. And the two are tilted by an angle of about 23.5 degrees, which is Earth's tilt and spin in regards to year. And as I said earlier, I believe based on these two things, day and year, which is different for all of the planets, some of them like Uranus, extra freaky, they will describe their own planetary or tropical zodiac. Now, these things change as far as the signs of the tropical zodiac through the constellations, or the signs of the star-based sidereal zodiac through the seasons. And this is because of the tertiary motion of Earth. So Earth's spin axis itself, while Earth spins west to east and orbits west to east, the spin axis is very slowly circling through the heavens east to west. And that's why it's known as precession, axial, the Earth axis, axial precession, because pre is a backwards movement, just like procession, like a funeral procession is a forward movement, a march. So the precession moves backwards through the sky in respect to the primary motion, the day, and the secondary motion, the year. The tertiary motion is this movement. Now, the way that astronomers teach this to this day is theory that Copernicus and Newton found their way to, just as the heliocentric cosmology was kind of first, and at least in modern times, remembered and then kind of anchored in. And the idea there is that the Earth is not a perfect sphere. Because we're spinning so much, there is what we call an equatorial bulge at Earth's equator. Okay, so the polar radius of Earth is slightly shorter than the equatorial radius. And that bulge, which I colloquially call Earth's muffin top, gives a little more surface for gravitational pull. And the Newtonian theory is that specifically from the gravity of the sun and the moon, which pull more on that bulge than on other places of the Earth, it creates this wobbling motion. And that's what causes this axial precession. So understand that as north, the North Pole is changing in its direction through the heavens. That means east and west and south are going to move too, right? So in our day and age, Polaris is North Star. Well, it wasn't called that for long because it was not always the pole star where the North Pole is pointing, or a North Star, and it won't be. About 5,000 years ago, Thuban of the Draco constellation was our North Star. In a few thousand years, Aldebaran of the Cetus constellation will be a North Star. We won't have a North Star in between, like the Southern Hemisphere does not have a South Star now. That is not always true. During this great precessional cycle, there will be different North Stars and different South Stars. All right, so say a couple more things about that. Now, this Newtonian idea that is still taught about why there is this tertiary motion of Earth, this wobbling, as they call it, based on the gravitational pull of sun and moon, I should say that that is based upon a cosmology which references a static sun, that the sun is not moving through space. Well, we now know that it is, and we've known this for some time. I was speaking about the apex of the sun's way just earlier. Okay, so there is a chance that this precessional motion, this shifting of the tropical zodiac through the stars, or of the sidereal zodiac through the seasons, that this shifting is actually just based on our Earth moving with the sun through space. And that's not what astronomers believe today. It has been suggested by one great guru out of India who was Sri R. Yukteswar, Yogananda's teacher, in his book, The Holy Science, and actually also in Yogananda's book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, this is mentioned that the reason why there is this precessional motion isn't because the Earth's muffin top is being yanked by the sun and the moon, and this wobble happens, but rather because Earth is moving with sun through space. And Yukteswar just very gently says, and that's because our star is involved with another star in a binary system. So if that's true, well, what is the other star? And I'll refer you to a pretty cool book called The Lost Star of Myth and Time by Walter Cruttenden, where he's really, through his work at the Binary Research Institute, trying to get after this question of what is the binary star that our sun is partnered with. And then also refer you to a study of the yugas, which is an ancient Vedic system, and perhaps Theo will want to share some about that. I will say that Yukteswar's idea of what the yugas are is totally rogue when it comes to what was transmitted in the Vedas. And there are many different philosophers and cosmologists that have done that work. But I will just offer that the yugas themselves, this movement through the ages, there was a similar transmission by Hesiod in the Western mythologies or mysteries. And in one way, it's interesting that Yukteswar said basically this precession of the equinox determined by sun's dance with the binary star is creating the evolution and devolution of human consciousness, among many other things. There's a wonderful book called The Yugas itself that you could read around that. So here again, we look at these three zodiacs, okay? And the way that I've laid this out with Anna Zaharia, that's our logo down in the lower right, Gemini, Brett, and Scorpiana. We have a collective called Arts of the Chart, where we are creating astro images like this. The outer ring, the purple ring, is the sidereal zodiac, okay? The inner ring, the blue glyphs, tropical zodiac. And you can see that they are aligned to the directions of the earth. And like a northern hemisphere astrology chart, I put east on the left and south with the midheaven towards the top. Very importantly, it aligns to what we call the natural zodiac in this way, because 0 degrees Aries, as I shared much earlier, is due east of the center of Earth. Earth's northern axis is always leaning towards the tropical Gemini Cancer cusp. So 0 Cancer is due north of the center of Earth. Always 0 degrees tropical Cancer, always due north of the center of Earth. 0 Libra, always due west of Earth center. 0 Capricorn, always due south of Earth center. The tropical zodiac is I'll say a shamanic system based on the cardinal directions, as so many around the world, culture, and time have been. The sidereal zodiac is based on the constellations. And true to NASA's argument, no equal division of the zodiacal circle of 360 degrees into 12 equal slices of 30 degrees can keep the constellations, because the constellations themselves vary significantly in size. But you will certainly see that the sidereal zodiac, the purple words on the outside, are much more aligned to the constellations than the tropical zodiac is. Like, look at the top and you'll see Sagittarius is with the Archer, where that in our time, and this is mapped for our time now, is more aligned to tropical Capricorn. So I showed an example earlier with Saturn now in tropical Capricorn, but in the constellation of the Archer and sidereal Sagittarius. So the sidereal zodiac is much more aligned with the constellations. That's one of many examples. And I found that many kind of younger or newer sidereal astrologers don't know this. The sidereal zodiac is not exactly aligned to the constellations because the constellations are of different sizes. In fact, many of the sidereal zodiacs begin 0 Libra with the star Spica, which is in the constellation Virgo. Okay. So I hope that the video I showed earlier of sacred geometry and musical harmony will help express what I feel to be the truth, that creation creates in 12. And Theo was speaking earlier about the magic of 3 and 7 and 9 and all sorts of other wonderful things. And that rich number magic tradition that comes out of the Vedic tradition is something that we should all be studying. And I'm very excited personally to get into that. So I'm going to show you how this thing moves from this time now. I'm just going to hit play. And this should move very slowly, but this is precession. And so you will see on the inner wheel, the tropical signs shifting backwards through the constellations, or on the outer wheel, the sidereal signs shifting through the directions of the earth. Okay, and that means also through the seasons. And as I've stated a couple times, I personally feel that this is a mechanism for the evolution of the astrological archetypes. Now, precession itself, The rate that is usually given, at least it certainly was in the ancient numerological transmission, NASA now disagrees slightly. They see 71.5 something years per degree of precession, but the ancient number was 72 years per degree. It's a number that shows up in all sorts of mythologies, and 7 plus 2 is 9 if I got into Pythagorean number magic and arithmetic, and we're not going to do too much of that today because we've already been talking forever, right? So anyways, if precession of the equinoxes, the shift of the tropical signs through the constellations, or of the sidereal signs through the seasons, if it's 72 years per 1 degree, well, 72 years per degree times 360 degrees will bring us through the entire cycle. I'm just realizing I have some slides out of place, so let me bounce really quickly to this. Okay, 72 years per degree, 72 years times 360 degrees, 25,920 years. Okay, so many teach that the precessional cycle is about 26,000 years. Yukteswar, who I mentioned before, says the rate of precession is not fixed, it changes based on how close Sun is to the binary star of our system, and that the overall cycle is 24,000 years. It's a really interesting thing. I recommend you check out that Lost Star of Myth and Time book that I mentioned before. The author is Walter Cruttenden, and I'm not saying I believe it, but I'm saying I'm absolutely intrigued by it. Okay, so let's watch this thing happen a little bit. I'm going to go from now, actually a little bit from now, 2028, which you can see in the upper right. Move my camera in case it's covering it. And we're going to go backwards in time. So right now in our time, the difference between the tropical and the sidereal zodiacs is about 24 degrees. Okay, so the question is, when were they aligned? Well, if precession is 72 years per degree, I have to subtract 72 years per degree times 24 degrees. And that 24 times 72, interestingly, it's the same as 12 to the third. It's 7,128 years. Wait a second. No, something went very wrong there. 144. Anyway, it's back. I'm doing the wrong math there. I apologize, but it's back around 300 AD. Okay, so let me just rewind this from our time. I want you to see that the 0 Aries degree of the tropical zodiac and the blue circle with the glyphs on the inside, so where Pisces becomes Aries on the left as we show the natural zodiac on charts, that line is going out to the head of one of the fish right now. Okay, I'm going back in time here about 1700 years. So I was reaching for 1728 years, okay? So 2028 minus 1728, which is 12 to the third, is 300 AD. It was around that time that the tropical and sidereal zodiacs were aligned. So that if you cast a chart, 29 degrees Taurus sun on one will be the same on the other. There's some differences just depending on which sidereal zodiac you're utilizing. There's many that utilize that philosophy, and depending on your rate of precession and whether you think it's fixed or changing, that it's going to bring you to different times of when tropical and sidereal agree. But let's say it's about 300 AD. And what you can see here is that the purple 12 on the outside are now aligned with the blue 12 on the inside. Are the constellations exactly aligned? No, because they vary in size. So like you can see here, both of the outer purple and sidereal and inner blue tropical zodiacs are aligning to the fish. But there's a bunch of fish. The whole other fish is in the sign of Aries, right? Because the fish constellation is gigantic and the ram constellation is not, which is interesting considering the way we typically delineate the energies of those signs. It's pretty much contrary to that. Anyway, I'm going to go back another 300 years to the changing of the calendar when 1 BC became 1 AD. I think BC should be called BP because at that Gregorian, or back when it was Julian anyway, shift, really they were calculating these things in 308 AD, but they were looking at this time that was supposedly aligned to the time of Christ, right? But why I say BP is because at that time of 1 BC, 1 AD, that shift in the current calendar, the 0 Aries point of the tropical zodiac, the point that is due east of Earth's center at all times, was just beginning to align to the constellation of the fish. All right. So one thing else about this precession of the equinoxes, it's about 26,000 years for the entire round, okay? But that also means that per sign of a 30 degrees, 72 years per degree times 30 is 2,160 years. And this is often seen as the time of an astrological age, like the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, etc. So first, I'm going to bring this back to modern times. I chose to go with 2028. Oh, wait, sorry. What am I doing here? I'm going from 300 AD, when tropical Pisces was aligned to sidereal Pisces, at least with the number system that I'm using here. And I'm going to go 2,160 years past that, okay, to 2,460, and I wrote the wrong number there, but this should be 2,460 AD, okay? And this would be therefore when 0 Aries tropical, the east point, precesses or moves backwards through the constellations to 2959 Aquarius, okay? So if we determined the dawning of the ages, okay, not by the equinox, the Aries equinox, the east point alignment to the stars of a constellation, like you can see at this time that east point is actually aligned to the head of the fish, right? Well, the fish is giant. If we want to honor actually a star-based division of the 360-degree circle into 12 equal signs of 30 degrees as the sidereal constellation did, well, if we saw that the turning of the ages was this east point, why do we look at the east point? Because east is the place of the rise. And since 0 degrees tropical Aries is due east for the entire Earth, it's like the ascendant for our whole planet, if you can feel me there. So as we're tracking that through the constellations, many will suggest, will determine the ages. Well, what I'm looking at is how that mesh of the tropical zodiac shifts against the sidereal zodiac, okay? And that's going to bring me 2,160 years about through these different things. So in that regard, it will be about 2,400. I think I did some bad math, and it should actually be more like 2460 AD, where the dawning of the Aquarius age happens. And there's many different routes I can get to for a start date for the age of Aquarius. Yukteswar actually said the turning of the ages, at least out of what he called the ascending Kali Yuga into the ascending Treta Yuga, or from the Iron to the Bronze Age, was around 1700. And that, again, is very different than most Vedic cosmology, where the ages are like at least 432,000 years for the shortest one, the Kali, and we get to many higher numbers than that. But it's an interesting thing that Yukteswar was talking about, the switch right around the time when electricity came online. And I'll show, not today, but in my article for the IVC and in my presentation there, a few different start dates for the dawning of the Aquarian age. I mean, but just to bring Theo back online here, I mean, one thing, if what we say about Aquarius is right, the fact that Theo on the other side of the world in South Africa and I are talking about all this like pretty high-tech consciousness, but over the ones and zeros of the World Wide Web, feels pretty Aquarian age to me, you know? So Theo, thanks for your patience as we went through all that stuff. And
yeah, sure. No, what I like about your presentations, Brett, is the amount of effort you put into the graphics, which is actually very helpful with this sort of discussion, because not everyone has a sense of space in their head, you know, and especially rotating things all the time. So that's very helpful. Yes, the age of Aquarius, what I wanted to say about it was, obviously in the Vedic astrology system, we're going to be looking at it from a nakshatra point of view as well, because the equinox is precessing through the nakshatras as well as the sidereal signs. So what we would say in Vedic astrology, the first 3 degrees and 20 minutes of sidereal Pisces is the last step in the Purva Bhadrapada Nakshatra. And the first 3 steps of that nakshatra are as at the last 10 degrees of Sidereal Aquarius. So from the Vedic point of view, it'd be changing Rashi, be changing into Sidereal Aquarius, and changing Padra, changing step. But the nakshatra is the same. So for the last 3 degrees and 20 minutes that of Pisces, that the equinox is in, it is the precursor or dawning of what will come when the precession actually moves also into the new sign. So I think it's at 5 degrees or so of Sidereal Pisces at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. So we're not really yet at the real sort of dawning of Aquarius, but it will be happening soon. We are in the cusp of it, in any case. And what we would say is that the moment that the precession goes into Sidereal Aquarius, which is ruled by Rahu in Vedic astrology, it will also be in the step of that nakshatra, which is of a Gemini energy, which is the exaltation place of Rahu. So it's an extreme point of Rahu energy. And remember, Rahu is a turbulence extreme factor in Vedic astrology. So that is showing that, extra planetary systems traveling in and out, we're going to be getting involved in those energies. And, Space Force, the initial, rumblings of these things happening, the level of territorial wars and things that can be happening potentially. But also Rahu's ability to think outside the box and to innovate and do those things will also be very prominent by that time. So, and I also believe that astrology will be becoming a lot more mainstream very soon. So I think the more that people are going under the influence of the nodes, or getting into that place as a world, astrology is going to have a very important centering purpose for people in amongst all of this. But that's what I want to say about the precession of the equinox from, I guess, the Vedic astrology point of view. And all the things you said about yugas are correct. The one thing I would maybe say is that you could argue that Yukteswar's view of the yugas is perhaps a terrestrial view of it. As you said, it aligns with evolutions of Earth history, humanity's history. But perhaps what the Vedas were indicating as yugas, again, he's using the same name for perhaps different things, just as we are using the same names for different, zodiacs and signs. So I think what the Vedas are indicating, and the calculations are very clearly laid out in the Vedas, as rightly you said, it's a bit rogue what he went and proposed. But I would say his proposal is maybe a terrestrial version of it, and the Vedas indicating a cosmic or universal version of it, because we're going to be getting into even more Kali Yuga, which is not just the resources of this planet we are fighting about, but the resources of so many other planets as well. So think about the political shenanigans and things that will be happening.
Yeah, because it's a fully cosmic, universal thing. It's not only about the Earth. And some have proposed there are Vedas within the Vedas. And I mean, as far as interesting, right? I mean, I imagine he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because
it's interesting
that the Vedas actually have the math wrong because they were calculating within the Kali Yuga, so they couldn't do the math right, which is a super challenging thing, right? That's what he wrote in his book, The Holy Sciences.
I think the interpreters of the Veda, I could agree with that,
right?
But the Veda is the Veda, so that whether you can interpret it correctly or not is subject to your own, variegated intelligence.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because, I mean, one thing that it's suggesting is like, we have these seasons of the day, sunrise, midday, sunset, midnight, which really correlates. And I think this is the key to the astrological techniques of secondary progressions, for example, is that daily seasonal energy has a correlation of the yin and yang cycle of the yearly energy of the seasons, and that there's a greater seasonal energy. But what's really interesting is, unlike kind of the day stations or the year stations, the yugas are not equal in time, right? Like the golden age, if I can call it the Satya Yuga, that is 4 times as long as the Iron Age of the Kali Yuga, and there's that 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 ratio. But you know, I'm taking us in like a whole nother realm, and that's
that's a
conversation I would love to have with you.
That's a whole, because actually in the Vedic astrology or Jyotish aspect of yugas, we have calculations for a time when there was 2 seasons in the world that became 4, and that now we're dealing with 6. So there's also showing a devolution in the seasons corresponding to the yugas, and there's also showing the devolution of the mind as a seasonal perspective on things. So it gets really, yes, philosophical, I suppose, but again, in Vedic astrology, it's tied to techniques. So for someone, for me to explain, when I'm teaching Vedic astrology, when I say I'm teaching Vedic cosmology and I need, 5 weeks, people are like, what? Why do we need 5 weeks for this? It should be simple, but it's so pervasive that as you know, the fundamentals of any context for any system needs to be thoroughly and properly imbibed and absorbed.
Absolutely. I mean, my students start drawing circles for a week, and then like we don't even talk about 12 signs until we've drawn a lot of circles and talked about some musical harmony, and it's frustrating for many and they don't keep, but a lot I'm just getting after kind of an older like mystery school approach to it. And I appreciate this like reluctance to fast forward to the certification, because we are teaching systems that in many ways have no end. And again, the Vedic system, it's so rooted into ancient times and it has been preserved. And I really look forward to taking the time someday to explore and to learn that system. And I really very much appreciate you, Theo, for taking all of this time today, late in your South African night, to communicate with me over on the other side of the world in California and broadcast for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency headquartered in Melbourne, Australia. So before we depart, Theo, perhaps you could please tell folks how they can find you online.
Okay, well, I'm an astrologer practicing Western and Vedic astrology, and my website is www.spicaastrology.com, or you can email me at info@spicaastrology.com for consultations, workshops, webinars. I also do teaching of Vedic astrology, introductory level, and Western astrology practice. Thanks, Brett. I mean, I really hope these kind of cross-cultural, cross-system discussions with understanding and respect really happen a lot more in the astrological community. And I'm very happy for CIA to be sort of spearheading this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing thing that like the IBC is happening and there's this East meets West. And I'm kind of trepidatious about sharing some of these things where I want to look at both the tropical and the sidereal, because last year there was a thing happened where an astrologer basically said one is right and one is wrong. And I want to heal that thing, not salt that wound, but I'm coming in on a kind of tricky place. You know what I mean? And so I really appreciate having some education from you today, Theo. I look forward to listening back to this recording, which will be at the CIA page and up on YouTube as well. I'll probably put it up on my Gemini Brett YouTube page. And I really encourage folks who are listening here on Facebook at the Cosmic Intelligence Agency page to become a member of the CIA. And you can do that at cosmicintelligenceagency.com, because there are free happenings like this, courtesy of folks like Theo and myself who just want to rap and share these conversations with the world. But there's a lot of amazing things that are offered from professional astrologers every month to members of the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. And we have agents around the globe. And I found out this morning that also some on the moon and probably on other planets and other planets about other stars like Spica or Spica. And so let me just say for Theo's website, if you want to catch up with him, and I hope you will, Spica, SPICA astrology.com. For me, GeminiBrett.com, Brett spelled with 2 T's. If you go there right now, you're going to find a waiting to launch day, because I'm writing for the right electional, and it will just direct you to my current website, which is morethan.astrology.com. So check those things out. I forgot. I wanted to do one more kind of quick animation of things. Do you want to hang on for that, Theo? Or yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I'll ask you just to mute one more time, and I'll get back into this. I'm first going to share a few websites, and one is an image of this book, The Yugas, which is a pretty cool thing to check out. This is based on Yukteswar's system, Joseph Selby and David Steinmetz, you know, not from that continent. Here is the book that I mentioned. Where is it? Lost Star of Myth and Time. It's getting away from me. Here? Anyway, there's the Binary Research Institute, which you can find online, and you can find that book, Lost Star of Myth and Time. Right now I'm just scrolling through all these web pages seemingly for no reason. One is OPA Astrology, the Organization for Professional Astrology, and I wrote a short article of astronomy for astrologers there. This is where Anna and I first created this image of the 3 zodiacs for. And some of the things that you heard me speak about today as far as precession, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I think I also look at the 13th sign thing in that article. Last year of 2018, I did a quarterly astronomy for astrologers for OPA, Organization for Professional Astrology, in their periodical, which is called The Career Astrologer. It comes out every equinox and solstice. You can find it at opaastrology.org. Go to publications. It's the 2018 December equinox article where you will find this rap about the turning of the ages. Now, I will say that that term I inherited from my first teacher, who is Daniel Jamario. And you can search Daniel Jamario or the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, a shamanic look at the turning of the ages online, and find a really wonderful article that Daniel wrote about this. I'm very happy to have begun my start with Daniel at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, where we care not only about signs, but about constellations too, because it's brought me personally into a bit of a sidereal approach, more of a constellational approach on the way. Oh, this is a mic I'm considering buying for my iPhone. Anyway, I'm missing one link I wanted to show, but that's okay. Let me get back to this thing. So, fix the math. Here we are, 300 AD. This would be one idea of a time, because the current separation between the tropical and most common sidereal zodiacs is 24 degrees. If we subtract 24 degrees through precession by this calculation of 72 degrees per year, that's 24 times 72, which is 1728. And I went back from 2028 to 300 AD, okay? And now we'll move from there forward by one astrological month, as they often call an age, 2160 years. That's 72 years per degree times 30 degrees, or one sign. And we get from 300 AD to 2460 AD. And this would be one look at when the tropical sign of Pisces aligns exactly to the 30 degrees of sidereal Aquarius. And a tropical Aquarius to sidereal Capricorn, and tropical Capricorn to sidereal Sagittarius, etc. Right? So completely off now by 30 degrees in the year 2460 in the way that I'm using the calculations now. All right. Another 30 degrees, or 2160 years from there, would bring tropical Pisces in alignment with sidereal Capricorn, tropical Aries in alignment with sidereal Aquarius, etc. This would be seen as the dawning of the age of Capricorn if we use the tropical sidereal mesh to determine the shifting through the ages, 6620 AD. And 2160 years after that, we would find our way into the next place when we have a full square aspect of tropical Pisces aligned to sidereal Sagittarius, of tropical Aries aligned to sidereal Capricorn, right? So it's going to be a really interesting thing. I mean, at that point, will tropical astrologers really be able to keep calling Aries Aries when it's aligned to the sea goat? Or if it's going to be shifting the other way? I mean, what about sidereal astrologers who are, you know, working with Capricorn that at one time was Northern Hemisphere winter, and at this time, many years from now, 87, 80 AD, will suddenly be Northern Hemisphere spring, right? So again, the tropical signs will shift through the constellations, the sidereal signs will shift through the seasons. And yet, here we have this tropical Aries sidereal Capricorn, which I think would be a very different thing than Aries Aries, or Aries Pisces, or Aries, you know, Aquarius, whatever. We've seen a few shifts here. I'm going to show one more from that 8780, another 2160 years, bringing us to the year 10,940. Because what I want you to see here is that at that time, well, you know what? I'm just realizing that that animation, unfortunately, I did wrong. So never mind all that. But I'm going to go back to our time now. Where is this? Here. Okay. 2012 AD. And I'm using that date because of the Maya long count calendar ending then, which likely was a transmission of precession. Because why? The long count calendar for the Maya is about 5,200 years. 5 of those equals about 1 precessional cycle. And it is true in our time that the axis of the Earth, whether it was seen this way or not, the truth is the cardinal directions, which are the solstice directions, that the south direction, 0 degrees tropical Cancer, is now aligned to the galactic cross. You can see it here at the top of the screen. You can see that galactic bulge we often call, that bright galactic center. It's right at the solstice degree. Now, however, we say in tropical astrology, you'll hear this often, that the galactic center is actually 27 degrees tropical Sagittarius. I actually do want to show one image from this article while I have it up. Where is that? Great. Sorry, let me get this larger. And okay, great. So here is the Archer and the Scorpion, whose respectively arrow and tail point to the center of the galaxy, which is an amazing thing. And Ophiuchus, who stands on that point. Now, the ecliptic you can see running about horizontally across this image. And that, again, is the plane from Earth's point of view of Sun through the constellations and through the signs of the Zodiac. And those are different things, whether you're a tropical or a sidereal astrologer. I hope you've seen that that's proven true today. The galactic center that we project to 27 degrees tropical Sagittarius, or, importantly, 3 degrees sidereal Sagittarius, and we saw earlier that is the exaltation point of Ketu. Now listen to what Theo taught us about Ketu from a Hindu perspective. I mean, it really seems to make sense, I should say from a Vedic perspective, it really seems to make sense that that exaltation degree for that being would be aligned to the galactic center, this idea of this ray. It's a very powerful place in space. Now, that galactic center, marked here GC, it is known because it was measured with radio telescope arrays and mathematically calculated. It's not something you see in space with your face. What you see in the sky with your eyes is the galactic bulge, or what we like to call the galactic cross. It's where the Milky Way, the plane of our city, if you will, the Milky Way galaxy, and the ecliptic, the plane of our neighborhood, if you will, the solar system, where they intersect. And they do so in 2 places. One would be at current 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, and the other on the other side, on the hand of the high man Orion, at 0 degrees tropical Cancer. I might have a picture of that here. Yes, I do. This side would be galactic center and the galactic cross, where our current winter solstice sun aligns, and that's basically from 1975 until 2025. And this is the galactic anti-center, specifically the star El Nath, one of the horns of the bull. But this whole hoop of stars from Capella and Castor and Pollux and Procyon, Sirius, and Aldebaran, or some use the Pleiades, surround this other gateway where the Milky Way and the ecliptic planes cross, okay? And some call them the Silver Gate on that side, say that's where we come from, and the Golden Gate on the other side, respectively. And interestingly, it's that Silver Gate place, which is the exaltation degree, sidereally speaking, of Rahu. Now, if these traditions say that's where we come from, well, that's not how Western astrologers are typically working with Rahu, North Node. But it's interesting to hear from Theo in this conversation today that that's exactly what the Vedic philosophy is suggesting. I had not heard that before. So that's a really interesting thing that helps out some of my own research in this way, and will certainly help with my presentation in India and Kolkata in February 2020 at the IBC. And there will be many agents from the Cosmic Intelligence Agency there. All right, so one more thing in these animations, and I'm going to go from 2012, where in our day and age, the 0 Capricorn degree, the south point of the Earth, is pointing to the galactic cross, the visible place of the crossing of the Milky Way in the ecliptic plane, here the golden circle. But if I want to get back from 0 Capricorn to 27 Sagittarius through precession, or let me say it this way, if I want to bring now that south point 3 degrees back to align with the radio telescope measured 27 degrees currently sidereal Sagittarius galactic center point, or 3 degrees sidereal Sagittarius, always 3 degrees sidereal Sagittarius in our current time, 27 degrees tropical Sagittarius. I think I said that wrong. I have to go through another 3 degrees of precession. And if we use 72 years per degree, 72 times 3 is 216. Okay, a tenth of an age. And that's going to bring us from 2012. We just precessed back 3 degrees, the sign slipping through the constellations to 2228. And so this seems to be a very significant thing. It's not the meshing of the tropical signs with the sidereal signs. We went through that. I think that's a really important perspective. But it's when the 0 Capricorn tropical will align exactly with the radio telescope measured galactic center. But we might not have to wait for that time, because it's in our time now when the poles of the Earth, and therefore the directions south and north, by which the tropical zodiac is absolutely defined, it is in our time now that the north point leans to the galactic anticenter, the silver gate, and the south point leans towards the galactic cross at the golden gate. So from Daniel Jamario and the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School's perspective, this is the turning of the ages. You have incarnated at incredibly powerful times. So thank you for being you and choosing to grow, because this is how the whole thing does. All right, Theo, thanks for sticking around for that wrap. Do you want to have any reflections on that before we hit end here?
Yeah. So the 2 things from the Rahu, from the Vedic point of view, is the reason why you're here, not necessarily where you come from. And also, I also wanted to say from the Oprah magazine, there will be a regular Jyotish column describing and detailing these fundamental concepts that I'll be writing going forward. So it's called Yantra, and that will be a regular feature in the Oprah magazine. So people can also check that out. If they didn't understand something, it'll be in a way piece by piece explained in the magazine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Theo. Again, Spica Astrology, which I've always pronounced Spica, but it's nice to hear that too. SPICAastrology.com. I've linked that in the description of this video and will wherever it's posted. And you can find me, Gemini Brett, at GeminiBrett.com. Eventually, right now, we'll redirect you to the current site, which is ThanAstrology.com. I sure hope you've enjoyed this play through time and space and many zodiacs, and I very much have. Theo, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation and for spreading the wisdom. And I really look forward to the first time and the many times that we get to meet Earth and connect, man.
See you in India.
All right. Until then, I will see you in space. Bye, folks.